Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Great to see so many people here. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Urban Ahlin, Ambassador of Sweden to the United States, up on stage to officially open the event.
Thank you, Johanna. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all here for the third Green Transition Summit at the Embassy of Sweden. We are proud to bring together experts, leaders, and innovators who are driving the green shift forward. A warm thank you to the Green Transition Initiative for organizing today's summit and to the World Resources Institute for being such a strong and steady partner to us. Sweden has long been a pioneer in sustainability. We combine innovation, policy, and collaboration. We are investing 3.5% of our GDP in research and development. So from Nobel Prizes to next generation technologies, Sweden's tradition of innovation runs deep. Swedish companies have been a part of the United States for a very, very long time. Most of the companies that you can see on the screen here has been here more than 100 years. Today, Sweden is the 9th largest foreign investor into the American economy. It's not bad for a country of 10.5 million people to be the 9th biggest investor. And as you know, the Trump administration is focusing very much on manufacturing, bringing manufacturing back. The latest statistics, we were third in investing in manufacturing industry here in the United States, only beaten by Canada and Japan. Around 400,000 Americans are directly employed by a Swedish company. This number speaks, and it's very important, that all of you know it, because we want you to spread the word, because it's important that we show that Sweden actually punch way, way, way above our weight when it comes to investment here in the United States. Most of these companies, and I would almost say all of them actually, are viewing the green transition as an opportunity for growth, jobs, and also for forming a better society. And this year's summit focuses on 3 areas where change is happening fast: clean construction, energy-efficient buildings, and urban mobility. Cities, as hubs of people and ideas, are key to leading that transition. In Sweden, we are rethinking how we build, how we're using cleaner machinery, smarter materials, and greener methods. You will hear from companies like Alfa Laval, Atlas Copco, Husqvarna, and Volvo Group. Our buildings are among the most energy efficient in the world. Thanks to smart heating, insulation, and planning, KTC, Alfa Laval, and Urb Systems are showing how innovation continues to raise the bar. Mobility is changing too. Sweden is investing heavily in electrified and accessible urban transport. The Electrification Hub and Candela are great examples. Candela's electric hydrofoil boat is even docked right outside, ready for test rides. I'm sorry I missed it when it was driving in, but my wife said it looked very cool when it came to the dock. But I'm sorry I missed it, so I really need to check it out. The green transition isn't tomorrow's tasks. It is happening now. So let's build cleaner, live smarter, and move better together. Thank you for being here and enjoy the summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ahlin. My name is Johanna Eklund, and I'm from the Green Transition Initiative. And it's fantastic to see so many people here today. This is actually the 3rd year we're doing the Green Transition Summit, and the interest has actually never been bigger. We were actually planning to be upstairs, but had to move it downstairs to fit everyone. And it's been sold out for a while and with a long waiting list. So it really shows that these conversations are still very timely and relevant. The Green Transition Initiative was founded 3 years ago by Business Sweden, the Embassy of Sweden, the Swedish Innovation Agency Vinnova, and the Swedish Energy Agency. We are a small team, and I'm here today with my colleagues Marcus, Mats, Malin, and Nina Bella. Don't know if they're in the room, but I hope you get a chance to speak with them during the breaks and learn a little bit more about our work and opportunities for collaboration. So this summit was created with a clear focus, moving from ambition to implementation. Across both the US and Sweden, we're seeing continued momentum, but also shared challenges and many opportunities to learn from each other. Our goal today is to connect the people developing solutions with those that can deploy and scale them, and to highlight how collaboration between Swedish and American organizations can accelerate progress. Over the next few hours, we will focus on 3 areas that are central to sustainable cities: clean construction, green buildings, and urban mobility. You'll hear from companies, investors, and organizations that are not just imagining the future, they're already building it. Today's summit is hosted together with World Resources Institute and the Embassy, and we're very grateful for this collaboration. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Dasgupta, President and CEO of the World Resources Institute. Annie leads WRI's global work across climate, cities, energy, food systems, and nature, working closely with policymakers, industry leaders, and communities. Prior to becoming CEO, he led WRI's Ross Center for Sustainable Cities and devoted his career to advancing solutions that both reduce emissions and improve quality of life of people around the world. We're very pleased to have him with us to set the stage for today's discussion. Welcome, Annie Dasgupta.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. I hope, unlike me, you didn't have a big lunch. I did. Thanks to this wonderful embassy. Ambassador, thank you for having us. It's fantastic to collaborate with you, with GTI, to do this together. And as I've told you before, this is my favorite building in the whole city. So anytime you have an event here, I'll be here. So thank you. Also, the ambassador is the coolest name. Who can have a name called Urban? I would have changed my name to that. Both are very good. I didn't want to focus on the alien part. But thanks for being here. I feel I just want to build on what the ambassador was saying about the transition. I think right now, the world around us, you must have noticed, is giving us really kind of mixed signals. One signal is very obvious, in the climate-related disasters are exponentially increasing. Last year, we had $300 billion of loss, physical loss, not loss of jobs or human beings, physical loss of $300 billion. UN says that it'll be $1 trillion very soon, before the decade is over. So that's already happening. It's not something that'll happen in the future, that impact of what happened in climate. The other thing is also happening. There's a concerted backlash against climate action at the same time, while climate impacts are exponentially increasing. The United States is an outlier in this, but it's not just the United States. It's actually across a lot of rich countries in the world. But at the same time, when this is going on, these two things are going on. As in United Nations, just 2 or 3 weeks back, president of this country talked about how climate change is not right and you shouldn't be doing anything about it. The next day, literally the next day, there were about 100-odd countries that got onto the podium in the United Nations General Assembly. Every one of them, every one country talked about what action they're taking about climate. Every one of them. Not enough, I think. They should be much more ambitious than they were. But the fact is that every country in the world is thinking about what to do about it and what not. Even in the United States, just to be clear, last year, 95% of investment in energy were in renewable energy. the United States last year. So a lot of things are going on that's not clear. I was in Vietnam early last year, maybe 4 or 5 months back. It's a summit of about 10 heads of states, Vietnam, South Africa, Ethiopia, quite a few of the Southeast Asian heads of state. And in that summit, the discussion was all about how fast can we transition. There was no hesitation, no discovery that what should we do, not do. No, every time they found me in the 2-day conference was, what can you do? How can you help? How fast you can go? How fast can we do? Because what I'm pointing out is that there are many different voices that's going on in the world today. But one thing is absolutely clear. Across the world, this transition, this economic transition is actually happening in every part of the world. Somewhere fast, somewhere slow, but nowhere there isn't a single government that is saying, oh my God, what shall we do about it? We don't believe in this, we're not going to do anything. This is true actually also in this country. It's that how we talk about it is different. It seems to me that this transition is happening because the technology is there for the transition, and you will hear about technology a lot during this today's discussions. That is actually there, that is commercially viable to make the transition actually economically successful, economically helpful. That's what actually pushing the transition right now. Renewable energy, renewable energy, solar, wind, other options, in 95% of countries in the world is far cheaper than any other source of energy right now. So this is the economic push. Where the hesitancy or the backlash, or so to speak, are coming is actually how to figure out the transition itself, the political process, the economic process, the social process, the transition. It seems where we have a lot of the hiccups. So I just want to talk about this moment that we are in, where there is a pressure for transition. There's obvious, all the science pushed towards transition, but there is this hiccups that's taking place in some parts of the world. So how do we see it, and how do we learn about it? I became CEO of WRI in the middle of the pandemic, about 4.5 years back. And when I became CEO, I wanted to find out what should WRI do, or what should I do as the leader of WRI. So I ended up talking to about 100 people, 100 leaders of the climate movement over a span of time. And what I learned from that exercise is that we actually, as a community, have done enormously big things in the past. For example, 20 years back, we didn't know how to count carbon. It was not visible, not countable. People thought we could not count carbon. Today, everyone talks about this many gigatons, that many gigatons. It's become something we take for granted. But we have done enormous important things in the past. I also ended up being very optimistic about the future, which is kind of weird, right? Because it was the middle of the pandemic when I was doing this, and the world was already pretty disappointed of the progress we've made since Paris. This is in 2022, 23. But I ended up being very optimistic about it, about the future. And I want to talk to you about that. I actually wrote a book about that optimism. Is there a slide somewhere? About that, and some, I don't know where Lauren is, but there are some books outside if you want to have a look at that. I wanted to talk to you about, of course, the book. I'm a cities person. The book has a chapter on cities. And cities, as you know, is a very important part of this transition for 3 very obvious reasons. Most people in the world live there. Most of the wealth of the world today is actually created in cities. But at the same time, most of the emission in the world, about 75 to 80%, depending on comes from cities. Because citizens, we who live in cities, I'm assuming most of you do, actually consume the most things in the world. So cities, how cities work or not work, how cities are managed, how we live in cities, is critical for this transition. But when I was doing this work on this book, actually a much bigger thing emerged about cities than just its carbon footprint. And that's the chapter on the cities in the book. And I wanted to share with you what emerged is this transition that we're looking for, this green transition, for it to be successful. We have to figure out not just the technology that already the market is delivering, but how to bring the different pieces together, how to bring land that you require to build technology on, all the regulations you need, finance that you need, people you need to build new stuff, or people you need to consume the new kind of energy or new kind of things. All these pieces need to come together for us to have a successful outcome and a momentum for change. And it turns out that these orchestration actually happens much more successfully in a city. The politics and social environment a city has, the proximity, political processes, institutional processes, finance, and citizens have, turns out actually creates a momentum for change that is worthwhile for us to pause and learn about. I'll give you an example. Actually, I'm going to give you a few examples. One of my favorite examples is in 2003 and 2004, London actually elected a very left-leaning mayor. And his name was Ken Livingstone. And people called him Red Ken because he was left-leaning, which is unusual, I guess, for London. I don't know. Anyway, one of the big things he did is that he said, London had a huge problem in congestion. Actually, he had a problem with quality of public transport. He created something called a congestion zone, a part of London that you said you have to pay a fee if you go there to reduce congestion, reduce pollution. And he started using that money to actually invest in public transport. It was hugely unpopular in the beginning, hugely. In Britain, they're very fond of betting. Anything they can find, they want to bet on. So they betted on this, and you could buy a bet for 4-1 that Livingstone's policies will fail, that the congestion policy would fail. And since Livingstone, actually there have been 4 or 5 other mayors. Boris Johnson, not very left-leaning, at least in popular imagination, also was a mayor of London. Each of these mayors actually expanded the low-emission zone. And why is that? Why is that something like this that everyone thought will fail actually became popular? It's actually Sadiq Khan now, who is the mayor now, is expanding that even further, and it makes no news right now when he expanded to 50 kilometers. Because when this policy was put in place, it not only actually reduced congestion, made the air cleaner, the money that they raised from that was invested in better in buses, in subways, and in cycle paths. That made mobility better. So people actually saw the benefit of that action to their day-to-day life. So you create a new political equation that these things are good, that this actually benefits. I just want to repeat, people who have cars who drive in London still don't like it. But people who like it are far outnumbered them who don't like it. And that's why the policy actually sticks. And it's not just in rich countries like London this happened. Peshawar is a country in Pakistan, in the northern western part of Pakistan. Peshawar is a very chaotic place, has been historically, and had a very poor public transport system. A few years back, 2020, the city leaders and actually a very progressive leader of the transport company started putting together a rapid bus transit system in Peshawar, of all places. And what they wanted to do is not only make a new bus service system, but they wanted to make sure that the new bus system, women can get access. They had actually special buses for women. And after they implemented it, the participation of women in public transport went from 2% to 20%. And how they did it? They not only actually implemented a system that's good for people, that works, and a lot of poor people could actually get to work, they actually incorporated people who ran the informal bus system that existed into and trained them to be part of the new system. So the political process that they used in a city actually incorporated the opposition that would have normally happened from the people who ran the bus system before. This is another example. It's not just transportation. In Philippines, there's a town called Iloilo, which gets devastated by hurricanes pretty regularly. And there's a huge amount of informal settlement in Iloilo. And the city, for a long time, tried to evict them because they're informal. This happens in There's 1 billion people in the world, by the way, who live in cities. Out of the 3.7 billion people who live in cities, about 1 billion people live in informal. So Iloilo is not an outlier. It's a very common example. So the city would try to evict them. So once the city, the association, a nonprofit, and the point I'm telling you the story is not just city governments takes this initiative. And nonprofit took initiative, work with these communities and the government. So the government actually sold them land at a very low price. That informal community could start building permanent houses, because once they had land, they had reason to invest in it. They built permanent houses. Other nonprofits helped them. And in Iloilo now, there is a scheme of actually poorer communities or informal community getting land and building more permanent, semi-permanent houses. A few years back, when there's another hurricane, very few people's houses were gone. Actually, no people died. This example is used over and over again. And cities, actually, I've argued in the book, should be not only seen as the producer of carbon, but should be seen as a place we can learn how does this transition process that we all need for every economy in the world, that how can it work in a faster way that can work with this orchestration that we need to bring different parts of our society together, not just government, not just business, but government, business, civil society, regulator, finance, they all have to come together for us to be speeding up this transition. That is what I think what we need. And one of the biggest part of the transition is behavior shifts, meaning you and I choosing to do something differently, choosing to public transport, or choosing to eat something differently. Because our consumption, our choices matter a lot. A study in United Nations published, I think 2 years back, showed 65%. Please look this up. 65% of changes that we can make, that is dependent on behavior shift, can have 65% change in emissions. Meaning that's not the only thing that needs to happen, but behavior shift needs to happen. In Paris, this is my last example, the investment the city made, and behavior shift is not just about what we do. It's policies and investment can enable shifts and make it easier for us to do something. Paris is a very good example of the investment they have made in actually cycling and walking. I don't know how you've been to Paris recently. It has a 113% increase in the current mayor's tenure, which has been a long tenure, but still. Is 113% increase of biking and cycling just by investments they have made. So behavior shifts also can happen in cities, which is a very critical piece. So my plea to you is to look at cities not just as a place of emission, but place of invention of a very different kind. Not invention of a product or invention of a solution, but an invention of institutional arrangement that we need to have this accelerate this green transition in a faster space. And I think there's a lot to learn from cities. And as all of you work in cities, that we need to look at how this transition can work and how we need to focus on not just the solution or what to do, but how can we do these things? How can we make solutions that not only are innovative, but stick? And in my experience, and I document that a lot in the book, the solution that stick are solutions that make people's life better pretty soon. Right now or pretty soon. Not 10 years from now or 15 years from now. And that is the trick, I think, for all of us who work in this business, to find solutions that not only good for carbon and nature, but actually good for people. And once we do that, we actually will see that this transition will move faster than it's moving right now. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much, Annie. Our next keynote speaker is Jigar Shah, a leading voice in clean energy, innovation, and finance. He recently served as director of the Loan Program Office at the US Department of Energy, where he helped drive investments in domestic manufacturing, innovative project finance, and tribal energy. He previously co-founded Generate Capital, a platform for scaling clean technologies, and he now serves as co-managing partner at Multiplier, supporting entrepreneurs advancing climate solutions. Please join me in welcoming Jigar Shah.
Hello. So great to see everybody. Happy Diwali. I'm very excited to be here. I think one of the big interesting things that Ani talked about, but I think many of us know about but didn't really talk about explicitly, was that we've been building data centers for a long time, for many years, right? One of the things that happened in the 2005 and 2007 Energy Policy Act here in the United States is that we basically banned incandescent light bulbs, right? And through that banning, we reduced electricity consumption in the United States by 9%. 9%, one thing, right? All data centers in the United States were built within that 9% budget, right? That's why we're basically flat in terms of electricity consumption in this country since then, right? So today, we think a lot about urban energy consumption, right? We think a lot about local law 97 in New York City. We think a lot about policy, right? Whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act and tax credits and things. And we think about, we have all of this extraordinary innovation, as Ani suggested, and we keep inventing more cool stuff, right? And then on the other side, we're saying, well, the key to actually reducing electricity emissions and energy emissions broadly is to electrify everything, right? More heat pumps, more electric vehicles, more things in the built environment, right? And as a result, right, electricity rates are going up, right? Because we use our existing infrastructure less efficiently, right? So our distribution systems used to be at about 40% utilization. Today, they're at 20% utilization. Our transmission system used to be at 60% utilization. Today, they're only running electrons through it roughly 40% of the time, right? So as a result, electricity costs are going up. The peaks are higher, the off peaks are lower. But we've invented so much cool stuff, right? Today, 20% of all loads, right, are shiftable. How many of you have bought something new recently and gotten an app that you have to download onto your phone? I just bought a humidifier, and they were like, do you want an app? Why do I need an app? I don't know, but I have one. But what that means is that all of these devices are now connected, right? I have the ability to turn on and off my EV charger from my phone. I apparently can turn off my humidifier with my phone. 20% of all loads in our country now are schedulable, right? And so we don't use it to schedule loads, but we can, right? So when you have distribution systems or transmission systems that are underutilized, you now have the ability to say, how about we shift that water heating by 2 hours? How about we shift the electric vehicle charging by 3 hours? How about, as you make buildings, which Sweden, of course, has done so well, into net zero buildings, right? That means that your building is now a thermal battery. How about we turn the heater on at this time, not that time? How do we turn the air conditioning on in this time, not that time, right? That allows you to actually reduce people's electricity bills in our country by 20% by 2030, right? If you actually schedule 20% of all loads, and you use the infrastructure we've already paid for more efficiently, well, then you can reduce people's bills by 20% by 2030. And then when that occurs, data centers are amazing, right? Why? Because the data centers take up all of that excess capacity that currently no one is paying for and is paying for it, right? And so that 3% of time when it increases the peak, you shift load, and it reduces bills for everybody. EV charging is amazing, right? All load growth is amazing because it actually reduces electricity bills for everybody, to Ani's point, right? Now, people see load growth as a way to reduce their bills, not increase their bills. But today, we have allowed everyone to believe that load growth increases people's electricity bills, right? As a result, they're anti-data centers. They're anti-EV charging. They're anti-lots of things, right? And so part of the challenge that we have in this moment is we have invented lots of cool things, and tying it to public policy by which we actually provide broadly beneficial outcomes to the population is something that we continue to struggle with. And I would encourage all of you to discuss today. The last point I would make is that for a long time, we've been talking a lot about climate, right? But there are another two verticals that are related, right? So climate is one vertical. The other vertical is economic outcomes, right? Economic growth. There's a lot of people who work in economic growth, right? So that is something that we and our technologies enable, right? We talk a lot about climate, but in fact, a lot of the technologies we're talking about also enable more economic growth, right? I think, and the third piece of it is economic security, energy security, right? So when you think about, the Ukraine conflict, everyone's talking about drones, right? What happened in drones? All of these extraordinary battery technologies that we've invented are the ones that are actually being used in drones, right? When you talk about the electrostate, people are starting to talk about the electrostate versus the petrostate, right? All of that technology is technologies that have come out of the climate effort and are now being used to great impact, right? Why is Ethiopia banning internal combustion engine cars from being imported into Ethiopia? They don't care all that much, to be clear. The reason they're banning it is because they have a surplus of electricity and they have to import gasoline and diesel. They would like to use their surplus of electricity and not import gasoline and diesel, right? It's purely an energy security play for Ethiopia, right? And so part of what I would encourage all of you to do is to think about today, not just about invention, but to think about, as Ani suggested, how do we make people's lives better? How do we align interests between all of these parties, right? When this friction occurs, instead of actually figuring out how to, reduce that friction through, like helping people understand each other's point of views, which is valuable. Also, how do we make 1 + 1 = 3, right? And I think that we have a lot of examples by which we do that, but we fail to have this community of people discuss all three of those pieces, right? So energy security, economic opportunity, and climate. All three of them have Venn diagrams that overlap, and I think the more that we recognize those, the more, I think, purchase that we will have in this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jigar. Our next speaker is Michael Izzo, Senior Managing Director of Energy and Decarbonization at Hines. Hines is a leading global real estate investment manager, owning and operating $91.8 billion in assets. And the company is not only bringing proven solutions from Sweden to the US, but also investing in Sweden. Michael leads the firm's global strategy to reduce environmental impact across its real estate portfolio and is advancing high-impact approaches, including applying Nordic models for retrofitting buildings to reach net zero. Please join me in welcoming Michael Izzo.
Well, in true Hines fashion, I brought more slides than I'm allotted the number of time. So you can go to the next slide. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about sort of how these two worlds came together. About 5-6 years ago, I actually didn't think I had a role to play in sustainability. Mechanical engineer by background, worked in the hospital and laboratory sector, and really energy was always important, but how do you really apply it to climate was the question. And so these two worlds collided in 2019 where we were looking to develop a new property alongside a 1930s property. And what I appreciated was the cultural differences. I come from an Italian immigrant background, first generation here. I didn't know what cultural differences were until I started touring the globe and really working with each other. Next slide. The differences are real. You can go to the next slide. Oh, my clicker works. The differences are real. Those Americans on the left, that's a nice continental breakfast. And on the right, that's a very quaint breakfast. But as I said, I come from an Italian immigrant background. That's the only breakfast I have before 11 a.m. But in reality, these two worlds collided in 2019, and really what Sweden gave me at the time was inspiration and a laboratory to play with. And so our investment in Sweden today has not only been from a capital point of view, we see it as one of our fastest growing markets, or the markets where the most opportunity is, due to its stable and transparent economic environment, as well as, like I said, the expertise that they have on decarbonizing or energy efficiency within buildings is quite great. So that exchange of knowledge has really influenced how we build today and will build into the future. We've done research projects understanding how district energy affects our buildings and the risk associated with that, as well as importing direct Swedish technologies into some of our projects. So Sweden, here's your time to shine. What I would say is the adaptive systems integrator, right? Really a trusted and secure and transparent environment with high level of governance. You have what I've never seen before, and we tried to start a venture capital fund within our own portfolio, and that sort of failed very quickly. Their theory was fail fast, but no one likes to fail fast economically. So how can we bring big companies together with small agile firms and really create unique joint ventures that really break open a market? And sustainability is just the status quo. My first conversation with some Swedes in our office was, why can't you just drill into the Hudson River? And I said, are you out of your mind? That's not even a thought in our head, or even allowable by policy. But that is just the status quo. Their high level bar from a sustainability point of view. And then from a systems point of view, how do we think about this in generations, not just the next transaction, the next buyer? How do we look at this for the long term and create real long-term value and look at more holistic approach? And then you have sort of the global accelerator, the US. Our entrepreneurial spirit in the digital world, whether it's AI, digital twins, in the digital economy, or the scale that we build out. I mean, how many cities have 2 million plus square foot office towers in the middle of them? Combining that with the capital markets that flow through New York, I think it's the second or third largest economy in the world, along with our global reach and our global influence. Given our culture, our language, our policy, we're able to scale way quicker than anyone else within the world. So how do we take those two worlds together and take the precision of Sweden and really use the force multiplier to create something that is really a market changer? So those pictures probably don't seem like they have anything to do with each other. But it was that trip in 2019, visiting Lund, Sweden. Have never been to Sweden before, let alone Lund. We visited Medicon Village, and it was this area of laboratories, offices, and housing, and really an integrated heat pump system that brought all those together with a simple water pipe and a simple water tank. And so that became the inspiration for us as we're bringing sort of this new development online with an existing building. How do we take that concept, and it might not be applicable in a district energy network, but how do we do it within sort of a single building? And so this is the project that we had looked at. On the left there is 345 Hudson, a 1930s pre-World War II building, and a brand new development. How do we bring these two worlds together and really develop? We didn't want to develop the last old building of New York. And so thanks to my visit to Sweden, as well as with some Swedish designers, our simple objective was to reduce energy, reduce carbon, increase comfort, increase value. And I would de-emphasize the carbon piece, because I think sometimes we focus on that too much and just focus on the energy piece. The amount of possibility to reduce energy consumption within the real estate sector is huge. And in this case, we actually saw a 50% reduction. But we took the old way, which was a very take, make, waste, linear system model, and created a circular system. So how do we share that energy floor by floor? How do we share it on a floor? How do we share it tenant to tenant, use to use? And really, the best energy used is the energy that you don't use. The next best is the energy you already paid for and are going to throw out. And then you look to really taking in more energy from your grid. And so the Swedish inspiration really became a New York reality. We created this thermal spine. So the thermal spine was that same thermal spine that was at a district level in Lund. And we said, how do we pare it down to a building so we can connect floor to floor, then we can connect building to building. And what you'll see on the right there is a 70% reduction in heating load and a 30% in cooling if we just moved one step. If we moved two steps, which was the more innovative approach, we would save 92% of heating reduction and almost 63% of cooling. What I would say is that there's a lot of lessons learned. You can't force a market, so we have to learn how to work together and really persuade the market. And so where we ended up was actually in the middle, but we also know that we can do much better. So the point being is, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Put the hardware that's required in, and you could always change this behavioral sort of science over time. Behavioral science doesn't happen overnight, and so how do we influence people one step at a time, meet them where they are, and really build to a more resilient future? And so there's the proof, the value of collaboration. It came down to dollars, almost $1 million saved a year, better indoor air quality, better thermal comfort, 45% better than what we would have built before, and 4 million gallons of water saved as a result. So that's a nice pilot, but how do we productize and really build at a platform level? You know, Heinz is at about $100 billion today. We're looking to go to $200 billion. That seems like a daunting task, but it's a vision that we have over the next 5 years. But how do we do the same thing with the components that we learned here today? And taking sort of the Swedish leadership on energy reduction and decarbonizing that scale, breaking down those barriers, creating much more of a synergy between large companies and small companies, private and public, and really provide something that's productized. We're taking some of that in-house and really looking to build strategies out, but we're also looking at various different companies to help us do that. And if you look at sort of, you know, the housing problem, not only in the US, but most of the world, the housing unaffordability has really hit in the last 5 years. And it's become quite unaffordable. We've built less housing in the past year than we have in the last 30 years. So there's a real supply and demand issue that we need to solve for, and how do we do that in a more innovative way? And you can see on the left here, sort of a Swedish company that's able to do that prefab housing within the factory. And that was actually an American idea in the 70s. I come to find this quite a bit, that starts with an American idea, someone else takes it, builds upon it, just like the Japanese did with cars, right? And actually the company here was very influenced by the manufacturing process and the car making process. How do you build housing the same way you would build a car on a factory line? How do you build splines into a main line? How do you produce sort of this at scale and volume? And how do we take a holistic systems approach? We know we're an innovator in AI and digital technology. We know we're looking to redesign our cities. We know we need to be more resilient from a climate point of view. How do we use data-led design and data-led innovation, combine these two worlds, and really take a 40, 50-year view with the technology and innovation that's out there in the market? So what I would ask is that the sum is, I think Jigar said it, but the sum is greater than the whole of the parts. We say that quite often. We both have our strengths. Pairing them together and being a holistic systems integrator that can scale quickly in a large market with capital is never the issue. Being financially feasible is always the issue. But how do we do it within that market? Create more of that export knowledge. And I think that's on both sides. In order to innovate, you really need to be open-minded and optimistic. And I would ask everyone in this room to be both, because no one who has innovative has been pessimistic or closed-minded. And we need to meet each other where we are and leverage our strengths. So with that, I'll say, let's build a better playbook together and look for a more sustainable future. Thank you.
thank you so much, Michael. Definitely some food for thoughts for our coffee break conversations. And now we will move into our first thematic block of the afternoon, building the future of clean construction. At the Green Transition Initiative, we've focused on this area the past 2 years, including a pilot project in North Carolina that we did last year, showcasing a fully electric construction site. We're joined today by our partner companies Volvo Construction Equipment, Husqvarna, and Atlas Copco, global leaders in electrified construction equipment. And to open this segment, we'll hear from Kate Johnson, Regional Director for North America at C40. She leads C40's work with cities across the United States and Canada, and previously oversaw the organization's engagement with the US federal government and national partners. Afterwards, we will continue the conversation with a panel on electric construction moderated by Mir Kaplan, Senior Vice President of Sustainability at Skanska. But first, please join me in welcoming Kate Johnson to the stage.
Hey, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the Swedish Embassy and the Green Transition Initiative for inviting me to be here today. As Johanna said, I'm Kate Johnson. I'm the North America Regional Director for C40 Cities. And maybe most importantly for this crowd, where I do see quite a few familiar faces, I previously served with the Washington, D.C. Department of Energy and Environment for almost 8 years. So I've done this work at the city level, and it's really great to see a lot of familiar faces this afternoon. I also should always follow Ani, because usually I have to spend a little bit of time and trying to convince people that cities are really important when we're talking about the green transition and climate action, but I don't have to do that as much today, so thank you so much. Can I change these, or do I, next slide? Oop. There we go, awesome. So for those of you who don't know C40 Cities, we're a global network of nearly 100 cities in the world's largest cities, all committed to addressing climate change. As a network, we represent over 700 million people and 1/4 of the global economy. So C40 Cities work collaboratively together to share best practices, also share when things don't go as well, and implement ambitious climate policies, most importantly to protect the people and the places that we all love. I'm here today to talk about something that's really important for the cities we all love, which is building the future with clean construction. So cities around the world, as several of the speakers have noted, are growing at an unprecedented rate. And with that growth comes construction. We see it everywhere: new buildings, streets, transit systems, and more. This construction is vital for vibrant and thriving cities, and there's a reason that counting the cranes dotting a city's skyline is used as a metric of economic success. But we also know that construction comes at a cost. Traditional constructive practices are significant contributors to air pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, and noise. And these aren't just abstract environmental issues. Anyone who's lived in a city has experienced the direct impact to the health of our citizens, the quality of our air, and our ability to meet our important climate targets. Oop, next slide. And that's where the C40 Cities Clean Construction Program steps in. So we bring together leading cities committed to tackling these challenges head on. It's about driving a fundamental shift in how we build, focusing on reducing embodied emissions in materials, and critically, and we'll talk more about this, transitioning to zero-emission construction machinery. The program launched back in 2019 with just 10 cities, led by many of the cities in Scandinavia, and now includes over 50 cities across the globe, all working together to support city action and policy adoption. Next slide, or I can try it. There we go. When we talk to cities about why clean construction is important, we sometimes have to explain the impact that the construction industry has, because this isn't something that traditionally, as climate people, we have necessarily counted. So we learned how to count carbon, but we haven't actually learned how to fully, in a lot of places, take into account the life cycle of something like construction. So when you do that, construction is responsible for nearly 1/4 of global greenhouse gas emissions. It also consumes huge amounts of natural resources and leads to air and noise pollution. But the opportunity for impact and scale through acting at the city level is enormous. So 70% of the world's current population lives in concrete structures. 60% of buildings that will exist in 2050 actually don't exist yet today. And by 2050, 2.5 billion more people will live in cities than they do today. Next slide. Or me, there we go. So what is clean construction? For C40, our vision is that cities can drive and demand a resilient, resource-efficient, decarbonized, and just construction ecosystem that ensures all people enjoy thriving and healthy communities, and especially the construction workers who build them. We define that construction ecosystem quite broadly to include all aspects of the built environment that make our cities great. Buildings, both new and old, infrastructure, and public spaces. In working with cities, we use a clean construction hierarchy to help cities address the full breadth of strategies that are available to them. And to start, cities should focus on maintaining, reusing, and renovating their existing assets. The most resource-efficient building is the one that already exists. Next, we focus on materials, both the amount that we use and the types of materials. Cement and steel are fundamental to modern construction, but are incredibly energy intensive to produce, as we all know. And cities are now actively seeking ways to reduce these embodied emissions through leveraging their own procurement power and through partnering with the industry. So for example, Oslo, Copenhagen, Portland, many more cities are leading by example with their own projects to incentivize and pilot the use of low carbon materials like concrete. Toronto was the first city in North America to cap the amount of embodied carbon in city buildings in 2023. So moving on from materials, next, cities must plan, design, and build for the future, including the future climate they can expect, not necessarily the one they experience today. So this includes supporting adaptive future uses for buildings and infrastructure and planning for the reuse of materials. Austin and San Francisco, for example, both have construction and demolition requirements to limit waste and encourage circularity. And finally, and most importantly for our conversation today and the panel discussion up next, we must accelerate the transition to clean and safe construction sites. So think about all the equipment you see on a typical construction site. Now, I am the mother to 2 young boys, so I spend a lot of time watching construction sites and have read a lot of books about construction sites. Good night construction site is my favorite. Anyway, so as my 4-year-old will tell you, construction sites are full of excavators, loaders, cranes, and more. And for decades, these machines have largely run on diesel, spewing out pollution, making noise, contributing to respiratory illnesses, smog, and as we know, climate change. But the good news is that technology is advancing rapidly. As we'll hear from some of our panelists, electric-powered construction equipment is no longer a distant dream. It's here, it's becoming more powerful and more efficient, and more cost-effective. By embracing these cleaner alternatives, we can dramatically reduce pollution, improve air quality, and create quieter, healthier neighborhoods. Stockholm, for instance, and of course I was going to include an example from Sweden, is implementing a fossil-free construction site initiative, requiring all publicly funded projects to use electric or other zero-emission machinery as part of their goal to be climate positive by 2030, which is one of the most ambitious targets, across our C40 cities network. And I'm very excited to share that the commitment to clean construction equipment is growing here in North America as well. In 2024, to build a market for clean construction machinery, the City of New York, with the support of C40, launched the North American Electric Construction Coalition. And this coalition spans cities, including Austin and Montreal and Los Angeles, but critically, it also includes the private sector and NGO partners. Its goal is to use the power of public procurement to drive and demonstrate the demand for electric construction equipment here in North America and in cities. So to conclude, the transition to a cleaner construction equipment and materials isn't just an environmental imperative. As we heard from Jigar and from some of the other speakers, it's an economic opportunity. It fosters innovation, it creates jobs, and positions our cities at the forefront. C40 research has actually shown that clean construction creates more and better jobs than traditional construction practices. And critically for construction workers, it means safer, quieter, and cleaner job sites. We know it won't be easy, especially in these politically challenging times. I know I'm speaking to you today on what I think is day 20 of government shutdown. And many of the cities that we work with are facing uncertainty about the funding for their infrastructure projects and many of the incentives that they had started to access through the Inflation Reduction Act. And we'll dig into some of those challenges in the panel discussion. But we know it will require city leaders, state leaders, collaboration with industry, and engagement from all of those invested in building our future. But the benefits are immense, and they are worth it. We'll have healthier residents, cleaner air, and more resilient cities. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Going to have a seat there. We'll be joined by Ray and Joe and Panagiotis. Thank you.
Thank you.
And hello, everyone. Good to see you. Many friends in the room, so it's very exciting for me. I'm Merck Ahlin. I'm the Senior Vice President. I'm the Sustainability Lead for our construction business here in the US. And as many of you know, Skanska is a company based out of Stockholm. And so largely why we're here. Although I will say for this conversation, the way that my organization is connected to this is we're the end user. Sometimes we're the developer, but often, at least in the US, we are the company that's using the equipment on the ground. And so, as Kate shared how C40 is looking at this, and we've been introduced to her, why don't we spend a little time and you guys introduce yourselves and how your organizations are working with electrified equipment.
Sure, I can
Go
start. My name is Joe Taylor. I work for Husqvarna Construction, a proud Swedish company of centuries. And we're very focused on the electrification journey, not just in our construction division, but in our sister divisions. And I think certainly we see the adoption coming in pockets where there's perceived and earned benefits. So it's an area that we continue to build solutions for our customers and end users like Skanska to have safer, productive job sites.
Dr. Gallant.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Ray Gallant. I work with Volvo Construction Equipment, part of the Volvo group of companies, of course, a Swedish company as well. We've been on the sustainability journey actually for a long time, much longer than most companies had ever thought of the concept. We had environmental care as one of our core values way back in the 50s. So for us, it's in our DNA. It's something we take seriously and want to be the leaders of it. And it's a very important position to take at this point because, as we talked about earlier, there is some opposition to it. There is some pushback. There are bumps in the road that we knew there was going to be. But it's very important, I think, that we take a leadership position and continue to push it forward and make sense to make the moves that make sense. Not all equipment can be electrified today. The technology isn't there yet for everything, but there is a lot that we can do, and we can continue to keep moving it forward. So that's really our goal and our position that we take, is to continue to move forward, taking the steps that we can that make sense within the economic realities around the world.
Yeah, great. My name is Panagiotis Papaioannou, typical Greek name. I'm the product marketing manager for sustainability for Atlas Copco Group, which is another Swedish powerhouse of innovation. I'm in charge of driving the strategy of electrification in our portable division, and that's mainly due to construction and mining, this kind of sectors. And it has been a journey for sure for companies that have over 100 years of experience. Diesel has always been there. It's how we now transition, of course, to a more sustainable future. It's what we're trying to do, of course, paving the road. So that's why we're all here, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a couple speakers have spoken to, and maybe Kate, as well, spoken to, this really has to be something that provides value for the audience, for the policymakers, for us as businesses, right? So let's talk a bit about that, kind of the momentum that's happening here. So where are you already seeing demand happening? Let's start and come back.
Okay, yeah.
You look like you were ready. I don't know.
Well, mainly we see it right now in North Europe. Also, North America has been an outlier for us. We did not expect such kind of transition happening so fast. And that's very good. Of course, we have other parts of the world that are more cost sensitive, and right now we're not there yet to supply the needed solutions for them. But it's, apart from of course, the lawmakers and the policies around, it also needs to make financial sense. And I think this, Mr. Dasgupta kept mentioning before, it needs to be something feasible and still profitable for companies to take over. It can't just be an idea that we enforce. They have to really go with the stream.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kate, any additional thoughts from what you shared already?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting that Panos noted, that North Europe has long been interested in this, and now we're seeing more demand from North America, and I think that's not an accident. Mm-hmm. I think that's the power of networks, whether it's connecting at the city level, the state level, across the industry, where you're seeing innovation in one part of the world kind of spark demand in another. I know we took cities to Oslo and other cities, and they saw clean construction equipment in the wild for the first time, and they were like, why can't we have that in my city? And I think that's just where it starts. And then, through networks, we can make sure that what one city has learned benefits, other cities.
You can see it work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So from our point of view, we have everything from very small equipment, ton and a half type of small excavators, small loaders, right up to 100-ton, 200-ton trucks and things like that on job sites. So a very broad range of equipment. What's exciting is we're seeing the small equipment is becoming economically viable because of the unique features of electric equipment. So the electric equipment we put out, people can go indoors and use them. They can use them in what has to be a fairly clean environment otherwise, without fume extraction and everything else they have to have with diesel. So that's been very good. The economic equation on a small piece of equipment, unfortunately, doesn't make a lot of sense. You're going to pay more for it. But if you can eliminate fume extraction, have a healthier, safer, quieter environment for your workers, then that's a benefit that people are willing to pay for. Mm-hmm. On the heavy side, what we're finding is we are now at the point already, at 3 or 4 years into this transition, where it makes economic sense. So even though the technology is much more expensive up front, as soon as you start using it on offsetting the fuel costs with electric costs, which are, of course, much cheaper, and as we alluded to earlier, if the demand goes up, especially in countries like the US, electric rates are bound to go down because the grid will become much more efficient. So when we get to looking at those equations, we're already at the point where electric is far cheaper on a life cycle basis. Part of the transition that we've got to make and the thinking that we've got to make and why policymakers are so important in the finance community is that these are long-term paybacks. So it's very hard to bid on a contract for 3 or 4 months and have parity with a diesel machine. It's impossible. So we have to wrap our head around the fact that if we want it built green, the contractors can do it, they can be profitable doing it, but they have to amortize that equipment over a 3 or 4 year cycle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's a great point on the indoor work, especially. We've transitioned over the last decade. About 40% of our turnover is now electrified equipment, whether that's corded or battery or some combination of both. But I think in the especially smaller format, it is especially difficult to get the return on investment that an owner of equipment would expect. But that's where we see another opportunity with circularity, and that is in equipment rental. So we have some fantastic rental partners here in the U.S. and internationally, where they have taken on the investment of bringing those innovative pieces of equipment in-house so that they can serve those out to contractors who are either mandated to use that kind of equipment on certain job sites, or have a genuine interest or need, to bring that type of equipment in. So, and that brings that user experience out to people who have never touched that kind of gear before, and brings a wider acceptance in the market.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I think last year or 2 years ago at this event, Husqvarna talked about the whole rental, like individual homeowner rental opportunities that were growing in the Nordics. So yeah, it's great to see you keep moving in that space. I guess kind of a follow-on to this question though is, how do you position it when you can't do electrification of the equipment? And so, at least for us, obviously there are regions of this country where we can't get renewable diesel, and that's really been our kind of bridge between the two when we're not able to do electrification. Any other thoughts on that? What the interim solution is renewable? By the way, if you're doing a project here in Virginia, there's now a renewable supplier that's about to launch here in Virginia. So.
Yeah, so we view renewable fuels as one of the solutions. There's basically 5 solution sets for heavy equipment that we're looking at. One is battery electric, obviously, or electric. We can connect to the grid in certain conditions and use power directly from the grid, so essentially plug it in and work your machine. We can go to hybrid models and hybrid piece of equipment. We can do the hydrogen technologies, hydrogen fuel cells or hydrogen combustion, or we can do alternate fuels. And we think the answer to this, the solution to this, is going to be a mix of all 5 of those.
Yeah.
So there is no, battery electric will only take us so far, because then the batteries become too expensive, too big, too heavy to work on mobile equipment. So we have to look at all different solutions and how they interact with each other and how we can make them work in the different conditions. If you look at each fuel source or each energy source, which is what we consider them, we try not to talk about the fuel, we talk about the energy. Every one of those you have energy refueling considerations. So if it's hydrogen, what is the infrastructure for hydrogen and how is that developing? If it's renewable fuels, same question. If it's electric, same question. Are we close enough to a grid to plug in and recharge, or do we have to have portable battery packs to take out and recharge, or do we have to generate our own electricity on site? And I would say, just as a kind of, while we're on that topic, when we are recharging, even if you're running a diesel generator, you're still 30% more efficient than running diesel in a machine. Just because of the fact that the generator is it's always operating at a very sweet spot. And if you can use a diesel generator and something like an HVO or renewable diesel, you are still making a huge difference towards the emissions on that machine and that job site.
Okay. Let's talk about real world situations, projects where you've seen, the electrification really coming to life, the focus around that really happening, and kind of what's the buzz around it? Why don't we start with you, Joe?
Yeah, I think a key part of the adoption is choice, right? And there has to be a clear benefit to the operator or the buyer or the company owner outside of, a force, right? The experience has to be better. The noise needs to be lower. The performance needs to be enhanced. We have to have a differentiating factor because cost is a clear factor. So, I think one of the interesting examples I have was in the UK with a scrapyard that was doing job site processing of, demolished buildings. And the environment that they were in, they'd been operating in for many, many years, and they had primarily used handheld petrol power cutters from Husqvarna. And you can imagine that that's a very tough environment. So they actually had a lot of apprehension about switching to a battery solution, but the reason they sought it out was that they had to get their noise levels down. These machines are very loud just running in addition to the actual activity of cutting. And what they found after a couple of years of running our handheld saws is they're getting exactly the same performance that they were getting before with the noise now at an acceptable level, which benefits not just the community around them, but also the operators that are running the machines every day. So it was an interesting stress test case where they put the equipment through the worst of the worst, and it delivered exactly as they expected.
Great. Ray, any thoughts on projects you've toured and gone, dang, that was good?
So we're in the, of course, we've done all electric sites. We've done a lot of demonstration projects. I would say we're still in that phase. There's still a lot of people that find it hard to believe that you can run a 20-ton excavator off batteries or up, plugging it in and recharging it. So there's still a lot of skepticism out there. The good news is the minute you get them in the seat and operating it, that skepticism goes away. So we're still in the phase of doing a lot of demonstration projects, getting as much of the public attention to it as we can, pointing out the benefits in emissions and noise. And like you said, there's got to be a reason to switch more than just it's good for the environment. The contractors have got to feel the benefits of low noise, of low emissions, of low vibrations on their operators. The health effects are huge.
Yeah.
And we've got to get people in the seats to see that, to experience that, to feel that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that echoes a lot of what I've heard when we've had city officials who don't yet have electric or fossil fuel-free sites in their cities go see them elsewhere, is that I think the noise impact is the most striking, and I think anyone who's worked in local government can appreciate how challenging it is to manage neighborhood expectations when you're trying to get big things built. Yep. Often critical infrastructure. And so I think being able as a local official to understand that there is a way to do this that is quieter, that is cleaner, that might address some of those very valid concerns. Think about some big construction sites in cities, these projects can take years, right?
That's right.
And there's value there. And so I think that's where we've seen city officials really interested in how can they use not only their procurement power, but maybe thinking about permitting processes being smoother for projects that are committed to using this type of equipment, because there's a value on the city side too, to be able to get this stuff approved and built.
Yeah. So for us, I think we see, again, 4 pillars. We see policy, we see cost, we see the ESG targets of each company, and health and safety. For example, we've had the construction company in Dubai, of all places, investing into our battery-powered compressors. When they were building skyscrapers, they would still have to have stationary compressors on the ground, trying to pressurize the slabs and the concrete. And now with our battery one, they could move it from floor to floor, just limiting their losses. In Chile, for example, with these raw earth materials, and they need to dig deeper in mines. And now the exhaust fumes and the ducting is not viable anymore. So our electric compressors, with much more silent, of course, with no emissions, are a perfect solution. So right now, we're not trying to think as a one-to-one against diesel. We're trying to incorporate some niche applications where people can actually see the value of electrification and electric solutions. And even in the first days of actually utilizing our systems, they can see that's a way, way better solution. It's just how do we get there? How do we transition their minds? That's the hard part for now. But
yeah, and I would say it's been interesting. The timing is a big piece of it as well. Yeah. That we are building the land side utility base and storage and all that for the Equinor, the big wind project outside of New York City, and I kept talking to the owner and saying, don't you want us to look at electrified equipment? You do, don't you? You want us to look at this? And finally our project exec was like, just yes. They said yes, just go do that thing. And so I had one of my team members do the research, and 68 pages later, that is how much electrified construction equipment was available, was actually already being manufactured in the world. The challenge being the availability, and that was about 2 years ago. So the timing was not great for that particular project. Obviously, we've brought in as much electrified equipment as we can. However, all of that research now carries over into all of our other projects, and in particular, the project that we're starting on Governor's Island, the New York Climate Exchange, which is a Living Building Challenge project. It's a net zero waste island. It's got all of these facets to it that really made it so that we have to prioritize electrified equipment. And so now we've got an e-crane coming, and we've got, and it's timing comes down to it as well. And I think it is scaling, but what else do we need to scale? How do we get to where we think we're going? And we know that we've got other options in the interim, but we need to scale this, right? So what's the holdup?
It's the multi-billion-dollar question, I suppose, right? If I knew that answer, maybe I'd be somewhere else. But I think it ultimately comes back to I think what all three of us have reiterated is that the user experience of operating whatever piece of equipment, construction equipment we're talking about, has to have that tangible differentiator from the way that we've always done it, right? And that can go from the smallest to the largest, and that's what we're really focused on. I think the other piece that you touched on, that is probably a really long list, and there's a lot of wonderful companies that have made big bets to put that stuff out there and get the availability. And now we need to bring the two pieces together where we find a repeat of these great use cases where we demonstrate how effective it can be.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned earlier that the infrastructure for charging and refueling has a long way to go, especially in this country. And especially when I look at my colleagues on the truck side, they have massive challenges in terms of electrifying the highway corridors properly. But the other thing I would say that's encouraging, to put an optimistic point on it, is I think we've gone from demonizing oil and utility companies to now embracing and recognizing that those are huge industries with massive resources that can bring to bear. And when you think about it, oil and utility companies are energy companies. They're interested in providing energy to their consumers, and they know full well their future is not fossil fuel.
That's right.
So they want to diversify,
right.
They want to get into all these other fuel types, and we have massive, very rich, very profitable partners there that we can partner with and collaborate with to solve these problems. So it's not going to be equipment manufacturers that solve the fuel problems in the US and around the world. It's going to be collaboration with these other companies. So that to me is very optimistic and very much a change from where we were even 5 years ago.
Yeah, optimistic, but not wearing rose-colored glasses. It's also realistic. Yeah,
I hope.
I think so.
Well, I think one of the places where cities can be helpful on two of the challenges that just came up, one is around the timing issue, Maura, that you talked about, which is like understanding on the equipment manufacturer side, where is the demand going to be for this equipment? And that's actually one of the things that the North American Clean Construction Coalition is working on. Clean Construction Equipment Coalition, sorry, there's a lot of letters in there, is actually, they've done an RFI where they've put together their pipeline of public infrastructure projects that they want to see equipment available for and mapped it out. And so they can say to the equipment manufacturers and the construction companies, like this is where we're going, not just where we're at today. And then on the charging piece, every city I work with is working on an electric vehicle charging strategy, many of which are including charging for fleet vehicles, not just passenger vehicles. So we need to make sure that your folks who are worried about charging are talking to the folks in cities who are trying to map this out so that we're planning for all the types of solutions we're going to need, not just today, but 5 years down the road.
I think also for us, it's about the availability of power. A lot of these construction sites start without even a grid in place because they just have to start digging. So it's really up to us to figure out a way how to power our equipment. And I think it's a strange battle that we're fighting. If the tables were reversed and electric technology was here first, now the diesel was the new technology, you wouldn't say that it's more components, more harmful, more emissions, more noise. Hey, but the good thing is you can always refuel it fast. I think that, yeah, that wouldn't be enough to make the switch. I think we have the better solution here. I think it will, well, I think we all believe it will be the future. It's just how do we make it fast and viable for our customer base?
Yeah. I know a lot of us in the sustainability space feel that you can no longer work in silos. You can no longer really hold things to the chest and say, oh, it's all ours. We want to be the leaders or the people who get the spotlight. I mean, we like that, don't get me wrong. But, you know, sustainability and getting to this goal of a more holistic, regenerative future really takes partnership. It has to, right? So let's in closing, let's talk about where you see the most important partnerships in all of this.
Well, I think, I mean, first, you know, through this initiative, we've had good collaboration on different projects here in the U.S. and elsewhere. I mean, for me, my perspective is for the world that I work in, you know, the rental industry that serves so many of the largest construction companies in the U.S. is certainly a key partner because they have their fingers in every major infrastructure project in the country. So that's where, you know, we focus a lot of energy is, you know, building that acceptance, making things make sense for them to try and have their customers try.
I think there's going to be a lot more partnerships across industries and across certainly verticals in the different industries that we're going to be able to collaborate on. But I also think there's a big opportunity on technologies. So, you know, as we bring in more telematics to the machines, more AI applied to it, more automation, that brings our energy demand way down because we're operating more efficiently, more just in time, less waste in motion with our machines. And I think all that drives a better result. So I think, you know, all of a sudden I'm spending more of my time dealing with telematics companies and communication protocols and cell towers than I ever thought I would and than I ever did earlier in my career. And automation spaces, you know, robotics and fully autonomous machines doing dull, dangerous, and dirty work. You know, that is the future as well because it's all about controlling the energy that you're using to do the work, not about how that energy is converted. It's not only about that, it's about controlling overall the energy.
A lot of the partnerships we have already been mentioned, so I guess maybe one that I'll mention that hasn't come up. It's more on the policy side, but I think there's room for more collaboration between local and state level on this issue. So we saw a number of states adopt buy clean policies for materials on the construction side. So, you know, cities build a lot of things, but so do states. And I think there's an opportunity to expand that to include thinking about the equipment as well from a state and a city procurement perspective.
I like it.
No, we want to see policy as an enabler, not really an enforcer. I think the weight falls on us, manufacturing, to bring a solution that works for the public. And okay, we can definitely see that that we can coordinate actions with energy distributors for sure, and also AI and Internet of Things will play a major role in automation of this. So I think the opportunities lie there. We just have to go out and grab them.
Talk. Joanna, do we have time for Q&A or we have like one question?
For one question?
One question. Wow, it's going to be really hard to choose. How about right here in the front?
Don't envy you, Mar, having to do that.
Wow.
Thank you so much. My name is Michelle Urban, managing partner at the Synergos Fund that has just relocated here to DC from New York. On the scaling of this, and I really enjoyed learning more about clean construction, how are the banks and the insurance companies supporting you? Are they generally supportive or agnostic?
I can speak to our experience with the protection of craftspeople because something that comes along with this, while it is better air quality, it's better, you know, noise and vibration and all of that, we also have to think about the safety of people when they can't hear the equipment coming, right? And so Some of the work and conversations with insurance and our risk team and our insurance team has to do with, what do we call those? Sensor systems that can actually alert the craftspeople if they're within so many feet, which you should have even if it is a loud piece of equipment, right? But ensuring that there's education that's being provided, that we're somehow instilling some sort of alert system for those people who will have to be working near the equipment. I think that they've actually been quite interested, and not just in that, in mass timber, there's so many things that are becoming more prevalent, and the insurance and risk industry is getting much more involved in the conversation, which we enjoy because we want to understand why don't you want solar on your roof? We don't understand why a warehouse can't have solar on its roof. Well, because our insurance agent said this, right? And we're like, let us demystify that for you. That's not a problem. So, any other thoughts on insurance?
No. Being from the manufacturing side, we work primarily on the sale of the equipment, and he brought up a great point. There is way less moving parts in this type of equipment, so just the asset life is inherently longer, which is a benefit just when you're looking at residual value on equipment when you're making a capital investment. So it's been positive for us.
Yeah. I think for banks it will always be a business case. My apologies for cutting down, but it has to make viable sense to help and be on the lookout together with us as partners in moving electrification.
Yeah, I think the cooperation's been very good, but the hesitancy because of the residual value, all those questions is still out there. Yeah. So, we can go through all the theoretical models about residual values and how long the machines will last and everything else, electric versus diesel. But the hesitancy in the finance companies to take that step is still there.
Thank you, Jenna, and thank you, panelists. Talk. And we'll be around. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. So we're now ready for the coffee break. So please take the opportunity to network and enjoy some Swedish cardamom buns. And we have the Candela electric boat down by the waterfront. So I think, Michael, are you here from Candela? If you want to go see the boat and maybe even have time for a little tour, I'm not sure, then you can please talk to Michael. And please just remember to wear your name tag when you go back into the building to show the security. And we'll be back here in 30 minutes. Thank you. So welcome back from the break. We will try to get started. I think a lot of people are still here, so I will get started. So welcome back from the break. I hope you had some good conversations. And we're now moving on to our second solutions block, transforming the built environment through efficiency. And we're pleased to be joined in this segment by our partners Alfa Laval, Herbs, and KTC. To introduce this topic, we'll hear from Dana Robbins Schneider, a leading expert in energy and sustainability, widely recognized for her work in retrofitting and decarbonizing some of the world's most iconic buildings. As Senior Vice President and Director of Energy and Sustainability at Empire State Realty Trust, she's helping lead the green transition in the commercial real estate sector. After her remarks, we'll continue the discussion with a panel moderated by Teresa Bacchus, Director of Sustainable Buildings at JLL. But please first welcome me and join me in welcoming Dana Robbins Schneider.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Are there slides? I mean, I can wing it, but it's probably not as organized, yeah. So hi, everybody. My name is Dana. Thank you for having me, and thank you for coming back in after coffee and cardamom buns. I'm sure that's not so easy. I think I have 10 minutes, so I want to be sure to stay on time. And I also want to be sure to address some of the additional points that I had discussed with the embassy team over coffee. So today, we'll talk about proving what's possible in the Empire State Building, and how our deep energy retrofit work has actually proven the technical and economic case for others to scale, which is incredibly important here, right? So our goal is to not only succeed in one building, we want to prove that this can scale to other buildings. So I do want to note that everything I talk about that we've done in the Empire State Building, from an analysis, design, construction, technology evaluation, paybacks, measurement, and verification, we do in every building in our portfolio. And we also look at every potential and actual acquisition the same way. So this has scaled in our portfolio, and then we share this work publicly. So I actually can't see the slides. So I think we want to discuss that. Sorry, I can't see my own slides, but it's okay. So we have net zero targets for our portfolio. And these days, we focus a lot more on energy than carbon in our public remarks. But it's important to know, of course, everybody here is well aware that they really have very similar results. They're not the same thing. But even if we talk about different focal points of energy savings, modernization, risk reduction, affordability, reliability, payback, it's the same concept we use when we don't talk about climate outright. But the work that we do, obviously, is also very much focused on emissions reduction. So our target is net zero for the Empire State Building, which we define as an 80% reduction in our operational emissions, all Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 downstream leased assets by 2030, and for the portfolio by 2035. So far, we have reduced energy use in the Empire State Building by 51%. And emissions by 59%. I hope I got my own numbers right. And in the portfolio, we've reduced energy use by 41% and emissions by 49% so far. And I'm really sorry. All right, we also talk about other important features here, and I know that Pete Templeton from the USGBC is here, so I will highlight that the building is LEED EB Gold, and we are participating in the LEED for Existing Buildings V5 Beta, which is super important because it's another example of the fact that the work we do is meant to inform better policy and better standards and even better third-party voluntary standards in the US and abroad. So we do a lot of work with Energy Star program and the Department of Energy, the EPA, and other partners to make sure things like WELL, Fit Well, and LEED, science-based targets, we give a lot of feedback whether they like it or not, and try to make those standards, frankly, more successful. All right, so the Empire State Building, and hopefully I'm going to match my slides. So you might guess that Michael, Izzo, and I know each other because our slides are kind of similar here. But the Empire State Building is 2.85 million square feet. She was built in 1931. We have over 20,000 occupants and millions of visitors every year. So this is a very unusual building. And I like to say that if we could figure this out here, you could really figure it out anywhere, because this is kind of the most difficult building you'll ever work in. It's also historically preserved, right? So minor detail. And it's 103 stories. So we have the existing system. We have a central plant, 7,500 tons of cooling, and district steam for perimeter radiators that distribute the steam around the building. So lots more details. The air handling units bring in the outside air on the floor. And I'll also note that Mur, who moderated the last panel, is one of our tenants. So kind of fun, because we do a ton of work together. I don't see where she is here. But Mur and I have done a lot of work together over the years. We actually partner with our tenants, all of our tenants, to drive these efficiency results. And Skanska has been one of our partners since 2008 in the development of proving the business case for investment in deep energy retrofits, not only on the whole building side, but on the base building side and the tenant side, so that we prove these investments work for everyone. All right, so I already made this point, which is kind of cool. So most of the way that we achieve this work is through energy efficiency measures. Like I said, it's not going to help because I don't have my glasses on. But our goal, so we're already carbon neutral in the Empire State Building. We have been since 2011, and for the whole portfolio since 2021. And that's, I think, part of the reason we speak at events, or I do as much as I can, is to say that yes, we've come a long way, but not fast enough. And so I do want to make sure we have a chance on our panel to talk about that. What would drive others to adopt what we've done, right? We share our case studies and show that it works, but what would make others do the things that Michael Izzo and I are doing in our portfolios, right? If Hines does this in some of their buildings and Empire State Realty Trust does this in our buildings, how do we make sure to get the word out so that others can understand that the work we do delivers a measurable, verifiable, provable payback? So I'll talk a little bit about the payback, and can you time check me? How many minutes do we have? Okay, cool, perfect. All right, so I have 5 minutes to tell you our case study. At the Empire State Building, we actually began our analyses there in late 2007. And I came out of my maternity leave with my son, who's now 18, early, to be able to do that work, right? And so the idea was actually to prove or disprove the economic viability of investing in deep energy retrofits, meaning investing in retrofitting an existing building for an energy savings of 30, 40, 50, 60+%, not the 10% you might get from an audit, which is typically the way people do things. In our work to create that replicable model, we actually proved a payback even stronger than what we had ever imagined, right? So we do calibrated energy models. All of our buildings have energy models within 1% accuracy. We overlay financial models, right? We understand all of the technologies, so my job is not just to analyze and make a business case. I have to prove that business case to the board to get approval, and then I manage the implementation of the projects, and then I do measurement and verification every year, and actually like every other day, to make sure they're working the way they're supposed to work. So I'm really excited to be here with all the companies, the Swedish companies and technologies that are here, because many of the technologies I learned about in school in the late 90s and the technologies that still lead now do come from Sweden and that area of the world. And so it's really important for us not only to continue to partner to demonstrate that they are viable, both technically and economically, but also to try to scale that so that we can do more of these projects in America. So what you see here is our actual cost-benefit curve. The first set of projects that we developed and implemented beginning in 2010 reduced energy use 38% with a 3.1-year payback. That included, which is an amazing investment. Everybody here should know that's like better than any stock returns you'd ever get, ever. And it's guaranteed. That also does not include, it includes straight up energy savings that we can prove and incentives. It doesn't include any kind of impact on risk, insurance, modernization, asset valuation, rental rates, less time on the market for vacant spaces, all of those productivity, things that are worth 300x times what energy savings are not included in any of our paybacks, right? That's a really important point as well. And so you can see that we looked at hundreds of projects and implemented 8 main projects, which have hundreds of sub-projects to deliver these returns. In 2020, we started what we call 2.0, which was our net zero goal. And I convened a team starting in March of 2020 to determine whether it was technically feasible and economically feasible to deliver an 80% reduction in emissions in the Empire State Building. What we discovered, which is that yes, the Empire State Building and all of the buildings in our portfolio can come close to an 80% emissions reduction with the technology that currently existed in 2020 and exists today, even if the grid stayed static. Overlaying what the grid in New York is supposed to do, which it is not doing yet, we actually have an extremely strong business case. So our business case to achieve net zero or 80% reduction by 2030 is actually based on a 5.9 to 6.1 year payback. Combined with the 3-year payback, we have a very compelling business case that we can make. I'm actually going to step down to make sure that I cover these really well for you. Can you hear me without this? Yes. Perfect. That's so much better. Because I want not sell any of this short, and I couldn't see which pictures I put in what order, so I'm sorry. So basically, I took pictures of our actual systems, and this shows the packages that we have already implemented in the Empire State Building. Some of you here might be like, we have these technologies, why didn't you talk to us? So please do reach out to me. We've implemented, in this case, heat exchangers. That heat exchanger is, again, this is a 1931 building, so it's like stuck in an elevator machine room with all kinds of Con Ed vaults and crazy stuff. It's really fun to work here. But we figure out how to do it, right? So we implemented our heat exchanger from a domestic hot water heater, which was no longer functional. We have implemented steam condensate recovery, water source heat pumps for lobbies, so Alpha Laval will have to talk about this. And this is what we've already done after our first set of projects, which were like retrofitting all of our windows and adding insulation and refurbishing all the chillers. Now we're looking at replacing them. New BMS 16 years ago, which we're redoing now, things like that, right? This is the second phase of work. We are converting our building management system to an open protocol building management system with super advanced actual fault diagnostics detection and FTT and analytics that we never had before. We're actually working with a company to develop this in real time. This is a picture of our first phase of heat pumps going in, which is very fun. And our heating hot water riser up the Empire State Building. So it is possible to retrofit an existing building like this. And we have 3 buildings with heat pumps going in right now. And then this is the BMS project that I mentioned, also implementing Guideline 36, which is ASHRAE's high performance guidelines. And all of this work is combined with having to educate the market, educate the contractors, educate the implementers, educate the bidders. But I would say one of the biggest things is actually educating people how much this doesn't cost, right? Because people keep pricing this work as if it costs too much. And every time I've looked at it, it has a great payback, whether it's a tenant space, a whole building, a new building, frankly, that are never functioning the way they're supposed to, or a historically preserved building like this one. So I just summarized some takeaways here. Net zero is technically positive. Net zero is economically positive. We've proved that the case exists. There's a huge importance in retrocommissioning, retrofitting, and reuse until it's time to replace that equipment already. And that's how we make our really strong business case. So I'll leave this up for everybody to take a look at some of the work that we are doing. This is all underway. And we look forward to continuing our work and sharing lessons we learn. Is this the right seat?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is your seat.
I was the whole time, I'm like, don't forget your seat.
Great. Perfect. Thank you so much for being here. My current role, oops, sorry, see, just bumped my mic. Let me know if you can hear me okay. My current role, I'm only 11 days into this new role, so go easy on me. I just started with JLL as the director and co-lead, team lead of their sustainable buildings team. But prior to that role, I ran a group called the Building Innovation Hub. And we spent a lot of time trying to understand what the real estate industry struggled with, both here and abroad. And so I'm very excited to moderate this panel today to learn from all of you and take the concepts that you mentioned in your talk and really turn them into what are some tangible actions that we can walk away with today. Because I know it might feel very overwhelming right now to do this work, but some of the conversations we've been having, really there is a lot of hope and excitement, especially when collaboration is leveraged. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to skip over you because we know who you are, and ask you to introduce yourself, please, and then we'll get started.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Strid. I'm the second generation KTC. We've been working with building automation for, I would say, 40 years. So I've been doing this for quite some long time, and I've been part of doing like resilient microgrid projects, and where we are like turning large building off grid in Sweden. Where I'm focusing right now is all about how do we make buildings autonomous? How do we make them run themselves? But to get there, we need to make the buildings more data-driven. We need to get access to data at scale at the low cost. So that's what I'm doing today. Yeah.
Great. Esther?
Very good. My name is Esther Codina. I'm the president for North America of Alfa Laval. Alfa Laval, we like to say we are a 140 years old startup company. So we get a lot of innovations, and some of the things we do, and I think, Dana, it's been great, you came before me because she showed the picture of a heat exchanger, and that's, basically what we do for buildings. Apart from a lot of other applications, we have a lot of different equipment, and we feel very proud as a company is making sure that we bring these innovations and the sustainability and everything that we do in every single product that we put in different industries around the US and around North America.
Hi everyone, my name is Will Sibia. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Urban Systems. We're a fairly small company in Sweden, and I try to explain what we do in multiple ways, and I've been thinking about it. So I think the best way to think of us is we are Ozempic for buildings. After you take a dose from us, the buildings don't need so much energy. They feel better. It's better on the wallet. Utilities may not like you, but that's what we do.
Very good. I don't know how we can top that. Yeah, that's great. We're done. No. So, Will, I'm actually want to start with you. Dana, you talked about some pretty impressive numbers that you've been able to achieve through, a whole number of different strategies, and how you made the business case for deep energy retrofits. So, Will, could you talk a little bit more? We're just going to go straight into the economic case for this work. We get asked this often. How do I make the business case for decarbonization and energy efficiency? But beyond that, can you talk about how decarbonization and efficiency is actually tied to economic growth?
When we started working, especially in the US, and it was a regulatory driven little bit when it came to New York with the local 997, but it's very clear the economic case was not there. But what I've seen over past years, and especially geopolitically, we have never been so energy deficient as we are today, like energy scarcity today, because the whole system is producing the scarcity. The grids today are not able to absorb more renewable energy. The demand side is still increasing, and we need more energy for economic growth, both in terms of the energy poverty, which is real and growing, and the energy scarcity, which is real and growing. So if we have to increase economic growth and reduce the vulnerability at the lowest strata of the population, we need to give them more energy. We need to give more energy to electrification. We need more energy from data center. We had this fairly high-level thoughts from visionaries, like Jigar, Shah, and Ani at the start, and they said like how 20% of load shift will actually be so much beneficial. So what we believe is reducing the energy consumption on the demand side can have such a large benefit on the macro scale, because there's a big fallacy, and that we're seeing in Sweden as well. The volatility in district energy systems is coming from not understanding the technologies that are available that we can reduce the energy on the demand side. So I think that'll sort of enable massive investments happening in the infrastructure, because then we don't have to think of traditional infrastructure. We don't have to only focus on resource input on one end. Now we can start putting infrastructure closer to the buildings which using majority of the building. We can start putting charging infrastructure. We can start putting energy storage infrastructure. So that'll sort of unleash a lot more benefits than we know today.
Great. And Esther, I think that's a great segue into the topic of energy efficiency sector coupling and the technologies that we are using these days, and some of the projects that even Izzo was talking about, and the technologies and what Dana was talking about as well. And since we know that buildings account for such a large portion of our carbon emissions, what tangible actions can we take towards optimizing efficiency? We talk a lot about these decisions, but what are some conversations you have on your day-to-day basis?
I think, with the way we work with this is a multiple approach. So we know for sure that 40-50% of energy is used in heating or cooling, not only on buildings, but in general on every single industry. And one of the things that we have been working lately is in saying, okay, if you find a way to optimize your equipment, if you find a way to create efficiencies from whatever you have, right? You have the first approach is, okay, you invest in something new, you retrofit. And of course, that's a fantastic business case. And we have solutions, for instance, ourselves, but, a lot of other people comes to the industry with a lot of innovative solutions. We have solutions, for instance, of low emission heat exchangers, right? That at the end of the day helps to decarbonize the whole supply chain. That's fantastic. But there is one part that, we started to focus more and more, and it's, okay, we need to look at energy efficiency. We need to look at, for instance, buildings. Buildings have heat exchangers right now. They have had them for a very long time. And they sometimes don't maintain them the right way. They don't have clear maintenance plans. They probably don't have the data, definitely, that tells them how they can create more efficiency. When you have a heat exchanger, you create a solution that is called, free cooling, but because basically the heat exchanger makes for your chiller not have to work that hard. But then if that heat exchanger is not maintained the right way, at the end of the day, your chiller has to work much harder. And so at the end of the day, we are saying that sometimes the solutions, when we look about solutions, we tend to recomplicate ourselves, trying to look for, big retrofits, and sometimes the solutions is, have you had the right maintenance plan in place? Mm-hmm. And it's simple, but sometimes it's not been seen as a priority.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, speaking of priorities, Ricard, we were talking beforehand about how do we explain to people the impact of some of this work and these decisions, and you were saying that data tells a very powerful story. So what are you seeing in your work, and how can that data and how we talk about that data impact the scalability of this work?
I want to connect that to the Ozempic. I think without a scale, how do we know that we actually make impact? And I'm very excited to work. We work with the largest property owners in Sweden, in particular one right now, Vasakronan. They have 750 large commercial properties. And they have been doing I would say, fantastic work when it comes to energy optimization, heat recovery, and they've been doing a lot of work to make the buildings excellent when it comes to energy management. And then they came to us and said, now we want to break this one asset into multiple assets to understand where can we save more. And the first thing they wanted to do was to install a wireless radio network for sensor data to get access to data at scale, which I think is something you need to get your eyes into the building or the ears to really understand what's going on. And so what's going on together with them right now is that we are connecting all their buildings into a wireless network, which is going to be nationwide, which makes it very easy and cost effective for them to scale access to data. And with that data, they will be able to filter out where should they put the money, where will they get the most bang for the buck. And I think that's my recommendation for every property owner or property developer that I speak to is you should start off by installing a wireless network in your building that enables you to get access to data. Because with data, you will be able to make the right decisions and to invest at the right place. And what I think is also very interesting is that they're not only looking at energy efficiency, they're also looking into how can they do predictive maintenance on the garage ports. How many times can you open a garage port without until it breaks down, and it's easier to maintain it than just to fix it.
So avoiding breakdowns.
And also and to understand, to get because we want to move with AI, you eventually want to move into autonomous operation where you have your digital AI partners running the building for you, and that needs high quality data.
Switching from data to policy a little bit. So I am very familiar with what's happening here in the District of Columbia with regards to building performance standards, what's happening in other markets, Local Law 97 in New York. Can you talk a little bit more about how those policies come into play? So, specifically good policies and good regulations, and how do you go about crafting a policy that is effective, but also how do policies impact your ability to achieve large-scale impacts?
It's a small question.
Yeah. Solve it for us.
Yeah, but I have to acknowledge what you were saying, because having the data and the data points is actually a huge part of making sure the buildings are actually functioning, or even maintaining equipment, making sure any of these projects work correctly. So we could talk about the engineering part separately. And a lot of people don't understand, I think, the connection between engineering and design and implementation and policy, right? Frankly, most people in school don't understand that at all, which is something we're working on too, volunteering in the schools to make sure people understand the interdisciplinary nature of this kind of work. So I would say from my perspective, I kind of got into policy accidentally as a result of working on high-profile projects. And I'm really glad, because what I discovered was that many of the people who work on the policy development, at least in the US and the cities, are actually subject matter experts who volunteer to opine on that policy, said policy. And so I'll take the example of Local Law 97 in New York City, which, if you don't know about it, Local Law 97 is basically a net zero legislation for New York City. And it ties into New York State law, which is called the CLCPA, which is statewide legislation for a net zero grid, right? And the city, the Department of Buildings, and the City Council, and the Mayor's Office, who are responsible for the legislation in New York City, once the legislation was passed for Local Law 97, it includes the makeup of an advisory board. And that advisory board would have 32 people on it. It's just illustrative, because it's how they all work. And of those 32 people who would be competitively selected, one would be a building owner. What I need everyone here to understand is that Local Law 97, in its entire nature, requires more than anyone building owners to cooperate. It is a building net zero law, meaning the only subjects of the fines or fine avoidance are building owners. And 1 out of 32 spots was going to be a building owner. So I think that's points the finger at policy not being super. And so we competed against, I don't know how many other owners to be the owner, and we were. So my CEO, Tony Malkin, had the job, and I got to work with him as his proxy. And honestly, I would say you will not have effective policy unless the right people are working on those laws, because policymakers are amazing, but they have to be balanced with subject matter experts for the policy they're developing, and the different stakeholders and constituents who are going to be impacted should really be represented equally on said board. So I would never say that we should not have everyone else who is on the board, engineers, architects, union workers, they have to be there too. But you really need the owners there to say, this is a great idea directionally, but what if people can't afford it? Or what if they don't have the teams in-house who can tell them what Alpha Laval heat exchanger to use, and that is actually affordable, right? So that's a really important piece of policy. I also will note that the US has never had national energy policy. We do not have national energy policy, we never did. We do not have a national grid, we never did, and we probably never will. And so we do still have an opportunity to make a huge difference at the level of cities, municipalities, states, and companies to make the differences we all know need to be made.
And I will add that, if there's a policy or a regulation, regardless of where it is, I would advocate that there be a building innovation hub or a support hub that provides the technical assistance and the connections and the knowledge to help those real estate owners understand what is expected of them, find ways to pay for it, get answers that they need quickly. And so having been working at the Building Innovation Hub and the Institute for Market Transformation, I think a model like that is something that no matter where you are, if you're in Sweden, if you're in the United States, if you're somewhere else, is a valuable tool to help building owners and real estate really find success in all of this.
Yeah, the more we share our case studies, like we share ours, I don't think everyone else always does. I would encourage everyone to share your case studies openly so people can use them and learn from them, because a lot of people say they don't do this because they don't know how, or they don't have the resources, and we're giving it away. You could just copy it.
There you go. There's another takeaway. Just copy what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be this building.
Right.
Right, and there's different typologies in the retrofit playbook, actually published by NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, is free online, and we made sure every typology in New York is represented with a case study.
Great.
But Trace, if I can add, the difference we are finding working on different cities around North America is New York is super advanced, and it has a lot of NYSERDA, it has the building exchange, it has a lot of solutions that are put in place where private sector like us can, showcase what we're doing. Where in other buildings we struggle to in other cities we struggle to find those institutions that helps, support, and so any help, that can be to replicate some of these, New York examples, in other cities will be really welcome, especially for us to be able to provide those solutions and go faster, right? We don't find the same network in Chicago, we don't find the same network in Las Vegas, in LA, etc. So that's one of the things that from a private sector, and when we talk about policy or public sector supporting solutions, we are not seeing the same in other cities.
Yeah, that's a great point. What would you all say to someone who says that energy efficiency at scale is not possible, or it's not possible fast enough, or it's not happening fast enough? What would you say to them in response to that in terms of what we can do?
You use Ozempic. You talk to Will and make it happen, right?
There you go. Anyone? Will, Ricardo?
Maybe some serious response from you.
No, but I think it is just a matter of time when, like Dana has shown in her slides, and we've been working with Heinz and Mike showed in previous slides, like energy efficiency is making economic sense. Like there's never been a better time where the economics of investing in energy efficiency has been better for all stakeholders. So I think instead of thinking of this as a climate or sustainability, it's just using less and reducing your waste makes sense. And it's making sense today, and it'll make sense in the future. Yes, there has been a knowledge gap, but I think knowledge gap has been because there has been so much access. I remember when I first came to New York, and we were part of the delegation was led by a former finance minister in Sweden here, and we met Undersecretary of Defense then. And then we're looking at the systems, and a very good arranged tour. But what was amazed is, and it was summer, that you're heating the streets, you're burning to produce cooling. Like from a macro point of view, it does not make any economic sense. Like if you have to make a system today, anywhere in the world, it'll be prohibitive economically and socially. Like you're heating the streets in New York in peak summer, and making people sweat more to cool buildings. Yeah. So I think it makes economic sense today. It's just that people will be pushed, and they are getting pushed, and now they have to look at the solutions because it's making business sense.
Yeah. We've done energy efficiency for like 140 years, so that's a given. Because at the end of the day, efficiency is what everyone really understands. I mean, and it's politically probably more neutral nowadays, right? So we've been very successful in presenting cases where we've been able to, present real savings in energy, right? And at the end of the day, the cheapest energy is the one that you don't have to use. So definitely, I think energy efficiency has no question mark. I think the problem is what solution do you pick? And what do you decide to spend the money on? And I think, that's probably the biggest the biggest question mark right now. It's, where do you invest your money, and what is it going to be? What is it going to be the data, and what is it going to be the return on that investment? And cases like, I think you said 3.8 years? 3.1 years. So, that's a, fantastic case.
Yeah.
Where you can really get a lot of, efficiencies from that.
So, Ricard, any final thoughts before we
Yeah,
open it
I can
up
say, like,
for
every time I come to the US, every time I check into a hotel, I'm super frustrated that the thermostat is always like, it's always freezing. And I always, like, the last 10 years, I always question, why are not these thermostats connected? Why do you not control them? And that's like the fastest way to, like, to peak load, like, to shave the grid, like, shave off the peaks. Like, so I would say the fastest thing to do is, like, connect all your thermostats and start controlling them efficiently. Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
Obviously, it's not happening fast enough, so I think it's important when everyone in the room here, I'm assuming, is very dedicated to making this work. And it's important for all of us to understand what we're up against when we do this. So I think that, we're all optimistic, but we can't be naive. And so having all of the data and having all these case studies, having the knowledge base to make your business case and your technical case and prove that these are better solutions. All three of these people help with that, right? So here's the right piece of equipment as part of the right system with the right controls in place. Here's the total cost of this. You have to get that right. It can't be too high or it will ruin the next step, which is your business case. So everyone wants an easy solution, and AI is a huge part of this, of course. But coming up with a solution with the right engineering and payback is, I think, one of the most important things, because what I've seen in my career is that people will assume it doesn't work because it costs too much, and then the job dies. So people like Mike and I have to be in a leadership position to be able to say, no, take 2 days, let us show you that it's correct, that this actually is a better payback than what you would have done. And we need people like you to help us do that. And I think it will absolutely work because there is no viable alternative to this anymore.
Great. Do we have time for a question? Okay. Any questions? Sorry, I can't quite see. Is there a hand over there?
Well, thank you for the presentation. I really liked the talk about energy efficiency, but I was curious about fuel switching, in particular the Empire State Project. How do you approach that work?
I'll try to be quick so we can fit another question. So electrification is an important part of the solution. In my opinion, it can't be the only part of the solution because resiliency is extremely important also. And I think that a lot of unnecessary criticism of this kind of work comes from not having super planning in place before you start an energy transition announcement. So the same way people before us were talking about EV charging stations being distributed properly so that Volvo trucks can run on them, it's the same example we have in New York where the grid carbon went 30% up the year that we started our work because Indian Point, which is a nuclear power plant, was shut down, right? So we knew that would happen, but it doesn't send a great message to the market. So I think my biggest message on that is beneficial, intelligent electrification timed with the grid also doing what they're supposed to do, because otherwise you could have a point in time where you're using dirtier peaker plants. So we really have to manage that carefully. I'm not sure if that's a great. So our heat pump, meaning electrification projects, are very carefully timed, and they're partial electrification right now so that it makes economic sense and also makes sense with emissions for now. I don't know if anybody else has something to say about that.
No, I mean, I will say the same that I said before. At the end of the day, it's, when you don't, energy efficiency, what it's saying is at the end, the energy that you don't have to use, right? And that's a saving itself, regardless of what's the source of fuel, right?
Yeah.
Regardless if you use natural gas or you are using diesel or you are using, electric, produced with either natural gas or produced, in any other way. So at the end of the day, the concept of energy efficiency is agnostic to any fuel type of form or shape. What it's trying to do is let's use less energy overall, right? Let's make sure that we look at our systems, that we look at our equipment, and we put solutions that at the end of the day will use less.
Great. I think nope, no more time. Okay, no, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we will move into our final solutions block, focused on urban mobility. To open this segment, we will hear from Robyn Marquis, Senior Director of Innovative Mobility at CalStart. She leads work across personal mobility, school transportation, last mile delivery, and oversees CalStart's Innovative Mobility Working Group. After her remarks, she will moderate a panel discussion with our partners, Candela and Electrification Hub. Please join me in welcoming Robyn.
Okay, I'm not normally a scripted remarks person, but we have a very tight window, so I'm going to actually try to stick to what I'm going to say here and not go off book too much. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. As you heard, I'm Robyn Marquis, and I lead innovative mobility at CalStart. We're a mission-driven nonprofit that's building the clean transportation industry and expanding mobility opportunities for all. I'm also fortunate to have grown up in the beautiful state of Maine, which actually shares a lot of qualities with Sweden. Both embody this strong connection to nature and outdoor recreation with vast forests, abundant lakes, and rugged coastlines. We share environmental values and a strong desire to protect those natural resources by investing in clean energy and sustainability. And except for a few major Swedish cities, we don't really have them in Maine, there's low population density, and most people live in small cities and towns with a lot of open spaces around them. This presents similar challenges and opportunities around transportation. I was back in Maine a couple weeks ago, back at my high school, a unique public boarding school focused on math and science, located in a very rural part of the state. The national highway system ends and you keep going north. It is out in the middle of nowhere. And I was asked to come back and speak with them about how I'm using this STEM education now to influence public policy. And I gave a very rousing presentation on how we're integrating modern algorithms and behavioral economics, which I did my dissertation on. So if you want to catch me after and learn more about that, I could wax poetic about all of this behavioral economics. But what the students and public really wanted to ask me about afterwards was successful case studies in mobility and how we felt we could improve their hometown. Mobility is personal. And many of these smaller, less dense areas are very motivated to find solutions that better serve the community and overcome their mobility barriers. And they're taking their cues from urban settings. They're adopting smaller scale integrated transportation services like demand responsive transit or community shuttle loops, especially around key hubs like town centers, hospitals, and schools. In fact, even in Aroostook County, northern half of Maine, where the school is, they've successfully piloted a workforce connector, giving locals a reliable ride to work and allowing them to overcome financial hardships. Commute time is the strongest factor in the odds of escaping poverty. This local experimentation with mobility solutions reflects a broader shift in how communities, both large and small, are rethinking the relationship between land use and transportation. And one concept gaining traction across this country, including in these adapting smaller regions, is transit-oriented development, or TOD, a strategy that aligns infrastructure, land use, and sustainability goals. And what's often missing around transit stations is this kind of compact, people-centered development that supports transit ridership and community vitality. Many stations are surrounded by underutilized land, surface parking lots, low-density buildings, or zoning that restricts mixed use or multifamily housing. This limits the number of people who can live or work near transit and often results in the transit systems themselves operating well below capacity. Without surrounding development, transit stations become isolated points instead of anchors for vibrant neighborhoods. TOD fills this gap by encouraging housing, retail, services, and public space in direct connection with transit, making cities more sustainable, efficient, and livable. Now, this is not a new concept, right? You've heard throughout some of the panels today, we're talking about things that have existed for decades, over 100 years. It has long been the cornerstone of urban planning in many European cities, where dense mixed-use neighborhoods are seamlessly integrated with high-quality public transit. And while it has been a concept in the US for decades as well, only in recent years has it really started to gain more traction, driven by growing concerns about climate change, which is real, housing affordability, and sustainable mobility. The benefits are multifold. It supports higher ridership, more efficient land use, less sprawl, and lower per capita vehicle miles traveled, in turn reducing the negative impacts from those vehicles. For local governments and transit agencies, it helps capture value around the transit stations, stimulate economic development, and justify public investment in rail and bus corridors. Simply put, it supports more efficient and equitable use of public space. But implementation is still very uneven. Many areas are lagging due to their zoning, parking minimums, land use policies, and coordination required between the many stakeholders, transit agencies, city, and private sector. And the cost and financing of these projects remain major hurdles. But momentum is increasing. Earlier this month, about 10 days ago, I believe, California celebrated the signing of Senate Bill 79. Legislation almost a decade in the making and more vital than ever in the midst of a growing housing affordability crisis. This new law provides a legal and regulatory framework that other states could replicate and tailor to their specific transit systems, institutional contexts, and housing conditions. It removes and reduces local zoning barriers that have historically kept denser housing out of transit-adjacent areas. It ties project approvals to the state's Housing Accountability Act to overcome local opposition. And it ensures that TOD isn't just high-end housing, but addresses affordability, that transit agencies can play an active role in utilizing the land around the stations for denser housing, and that broader land use planning is aligned with housing targets and transit goals. The emergence of zero-emission vehicles, or ZEVs, is transforming the mobility and land use equation for TOD, and their true potential is unlocked when implemented together. Together, these strategies address both the demand for fewer car trips and the need to clean up the trips that still occur, with lower range demands and easier to access shared or public charging. So the last panel spoke a lot about energy efficiency. Mobility really is the energy efficiency piece of the transportation sector. And this dual strategy also allows communities to focus on land use and infrastructure investments more efficiently and shift priorities away from sprawling road networks, better responding to local barriers and needs. E-mobility hubs integrate seamlessly into TOD strategies by providing a physical nexus of centralized, flexible space where multiple modes converge. These hubs typically include amenities like EV charging, e-bike and e-scooter docks, car share and ride share pickup zones, microtransit links, maybe even ferries, and even Wi-Fi, public lockers, and community gathering spaces. Co-locating these services near higher capacity transit stations or in dense mixed-use areas extends the reach of public transit and offers first last mile solutions that make it easier for people to get around without a private vehicle and actually change their behavior, as we heard about in the early keynotes. The path to a more sustainable and equitable transportation future requires a multifaceted approach, one that integrates land use, mobility, and technology. TOD and ZEVs are just two of the complementary tools that, when implemented together, can transform how people move, live, and access opportunity. So the panel now is going to expand more on these specific solutions. I went a little high-level policy direction, And we'll talk about how we can actually effectively scale these solutions with firsthand experience from planning, technology, partnerships, and policy, and provide some insights on what's working, where challenges still remain, and how we can accelerate the green transition in communities of all sizes. Thank you.
Take these three.
Yeah?
Ja.
Where?
Jag skulle sätta på den, jag skulle sätta på den. Så gör jag. Var det så?
Okay. All right. I believe we have 15 minutes, so I'm going to keep us also tight here. So by way of asking the first question, I'm also going to ask you to intro yourselves. So I mentioned that we're going to tee up more some actual success stories. So please introduce yourselves, and then briefly also, what is a success from your region that could be replicated elsewhere?
Sure. Yeah. So fantastic to be here. My name is Mikael Malberg, and I work at Candela, the electric hydrofoil ferry and boat maker. You might have seen one of our vessels outside here, which is docked just by the embassy. And one success story, I would say, I think, from Sweden is our pilot line, which we have there on the waterways. So we run a line together with the Public Transport Authority in Stockholm with our new Candela P12 ferry, which is running from Stockholm center to a suburb called Ekerö. It's a 5-mile journey, takes an hour by car, and takes only 25-30 minutes with the Candela P12 because we got a speed exemption to run quickly in the city center. Because our vessel doesn't create any wake, it just flies above the water using very little energy. And I think that's a success story. I'm not sure if I can cover this in the intro, but it's been a lot of stakeholders working with the government to get the speed exemption and also the Public Transport Authority in order to sort of make this happen. Yeah.
And I head up Electrification Hub, and we call it Innovation Accelerator. So we try to accelerate the transition to electrified mobility. And we work with some of the bigger industrials, so Volvo Construction Equipment, Hitachi Energy, ABB, Epiroc, Alstom, and so on, as well as academics. So we have 3 or 4 universities and research institutes connected to us. So we try to work with this kind of public-private and academic partnerships and see how we move things forward. One example of what we've been doing is looking at building out tramways in a city in Sweden, where we did a study on understanding how the construction work could be done and the energy efficiency and is there energy, is there machines, how do you set it up? What problems do you have on the operator side and everything? And it really shows that there are very few barriers to doing it. There aren't hardly any limits to it if you do it on that scale, which means that you can build it out very much more across a city.
Yeah, I'll give a brief example from some of our work in a program in California that funds shared mobility pilots. There's a community called Redding near Mount Shasta. So I don't know if anyone's ever been out there or enjoys the mountains, outdoor space, but they were looking to secure a large strategic growth council grant for affordable housing complex. And the requirements also included that they provided alternative modes so that they didn't just build a bunch of housing and then everyone in it would be relying on cars, and especially for affordable housing, vehicle ownership is still also very unaffordable. So they pursued this other grant program and tried to couple them together to launch a small-scale bike share. And they do have a train hub there, so they built this kind of bike depot around the housing and the train access, not just for residents, but for visitors that are coming to explore the great outdoors. And they have bike lockers for personally owned bikes, they have mechanics on site, and it's a place just to gather as well. But you could also pick up and use one of their shared bikes if you don't have your own. So they coupled together the housing with the additional modes to make it easier to explore the greater region, and they've been doing more to improve trail access by bike as well. So you spoke a bit about the barrier side of it and how, at that scale, maybe there are fewer barriers, but broadly speaking, what are some of the greatest barriers to achieving that scale?
I think on our side, it's today it's the procurement. It's going too slow. People aren't investing in it or asking for kind of electrified machines in the same rate that we're expecting it to be. They don't, and by doing it very small sized, I think some of the speakers here spoke about that before. If you do it small size, you don't get the economics of it, and you don't get the real benefits of actually doing it over time. So the total cost of ownership and all of that goes away. So I think that's one of the problems. And it's on the public side, and it's also on the private side. I think that's one of the bigger barriers today.
Yeah, I would say I think procurement is a big factor when it comes to public procurement. I mean, in Sweden we have these procurement rules that typically specify the number of passengers each ship is supposed to take. Usually it's 90 or plus, and our vessel is a 30 passenger sort of bus on water. So that's an issue that we're trying to change, raise. So most of our customers are private operators, property developers, or hospitality industry. So we've sold a vessel to Lake Tahoe, and we are also negotiating quite large deals here in the US as well. And that sort of brings us to one of the other barriers, which is the Jones Act. It's a trade policy, one could perhaps say. It's over 100 years old, but it stipulates that vessels that go on domestic routes in the US need to be manufactured in the US, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because it makes sense to make vessels in the US anyways instead of shipping them over the pond, sort of. But yeah, I think that's the procurement rules are something. It's slower on the public side than on the private side. Yeah.
Yeah, from a planning and my team does a lot of technical assistance for under-resourced communities. I said in my remarks, transportation's personal, it's very local. So you're addressing local conditions, local capacity. So in that respect, it does make it sometimes hard to scale. So we look at more the process and the steps taken to understand what are the current barriers and gaps, what do they need, and kind of from this menu of solutions, like ferries, bikes, et cetera, what best fits that. So the exact bundle isn't necessarily as replicable, but the approach taken and the solutions, and I think Dana said it in the buildings remarks as well, the technologies and the solutions are largely out there. Yeah. And it's really about the way in which they're combined and who's at the table that actually makes it implementable in these different locations. So we've all talked a bit also about the who of this. So just want to expand a bit on that. Who really needs to be involved to successfully integrate these solutions and for them to be done at scale? Mikael, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think our pilot project and pilot line in Stockholm is a pretty good example, because there are so many stakeholders there in order to make that happen. And that's the world's first electric hydrofoil ferry line, and it's the world's first electric high-speed ferry line as well, actually. So it's a bit of a world first. And in order for that to happen, we needed to have a speed exemption. Because we want to go 25 knots on the waterways where you can only go 8 knots, right? Because of conventional boats make these huge wakes that prevent the waterways from being used efficiently. And it took us the better half of a year to get that exemption, despite the fact that we could prove that, okay, there are virtually no other boats out on the waterways during low season. So we worked a lot with the regional transport authorities, of course, and all the stakeholders that can say no to a proposal like this, like the Maritime Agency and the Coast Guard and so on. So I think involving these stakeholders early on is necessary. And then obviously, I mean, funding for a company making hardware, not only software. It's also, it can be a tricky part. I think Sweden's ecosystem when it comes to the VC capital is great. I mean, we're a small country, but we've produced a lot of innovations over the years. We do homegrown things pretty well, like the Saab Gripen fighter jet, for example, that's made in-house. We haven't bought the F-16 or done a big consortium like the Eurofighter. I think 2 million Swedish people are actually are stock owners. So all of that cash goes into sort of innovation in a way. The Swedish, we have a lot of company listings as well. So it's a good place to raise money, especially compared to other parts of Germany, other parts of the EU. So that makes it easier to make this sort of transition from a very small company with an idea to actually serial production thing. Yeah.
For us, one of the projects we're involved in today is a municipality basically, where they have a steel mill which is changing into electrified processes, and around it you have a port which is of course onshore electricity. You have all the working machines in that port, and you also have working machines on site, as well as industrial companies around it and buildings. And I think these are kind of the bigger system demonstrators we're looking into right now, because then only at that point do you get the flexibility. We spoke about that a bit before, because now you have several different parts of the ecosystem or the energy system that are using it, and then you can create that flexibility when you use different things. However, then of course you see that you have to have a number of stakeholders. You have to have the big industry in this case, and interesting enough, when they change into the electrified steel mill, they take away 3% of Sweden's CO2 emissions, 3%. So and if you do all of that other stuff around it, it's good, but that's really what's driving it. And then you have to have them on board, the utilities companies, the companies doing solutions for the energy system. So we have Volvo Construction Equipment doing machines. You have all the industrial players around it, municipality, and so on. At the same time, so this is a lot of different stakeholders in one case. The interesting thing is they all pick out different things. So the corporates want to scale, of course, going global, using their solutions to sell. We have hundreds of ports around the world, thousands of ports. Can we sell the same solution to other ports? Do we have other places like mines or logistics centers that use the same type of technology? Can we scale it? So that's super interesting for them. However, who takes a lead is very different in each case. Sometimes it's a big industrial, sometimes it's a utility company. So it's going to be very different, and that makes an interesting case for how do you manage these kind of consortia, because it's not one size fits all, I think. Yeah.
So this was a very quick session. We're coming up on the end. And so in the closing, I'd like you to both address, we're having great conversations. There's a lot of really bright and influential and motivated folks in the room. How can we use this as a jumping off point? How can we ensure that we're not just discussing, but we're continuing beyond and having impact? What would you like to see come out of it, I guess, in short?
Well, I would like to sell some ferries, of course, right? To be frank, and I think we have a pretty good case for that. I think just being here and showcasing how our technology can change waterborne transport in DC is fantastic. It's been a great initiative, and we just had this gentleman the other day who was stuck in traffic during the Zelensky meeting. He wanted to visit us in Arlington, and he was here in Georgetown, but he couldn't get an Uber. So we took him from the dock down here to Arlington in 6 minutes, right? And I think that sort of shows the potential for a waterborne service here in Washington, D.C. And I mean, we obviously have, we can't do everything with flying ferries, right? That's true. But we can have this multimodal sort of system where you don't always have to drive a car.
And we don't have cool ferries, so but we're super happy to do kind of the scaling of what I talked about. So if there are examples of areas or cases where we can do that, portions of it or larger scale, we're super happy to collaborate on that.
I'll say ditto, and I'm also really interested in learning more about subnational, state and regional funding opportunities for this work. Taken a bit of a hit in this administration and looking for new ways to keep this momentum going in the communities that need it the most. So I think we're fully out of time now, or is it? Okay, we do have time for a question. All right.
I should say that if you have any fun pilots, use cases or routes out there, so please feel free to come to me and discuss more.
So, yes. Thank you all very much. My name is Rob Savage. I'm an elected official in Annapolis. And so I have a question about the scalability, because we're in a situation where we're trying to move forward on the micromobility, the bikes, cycling lanes, even ferry. We're working on that. We have some grants to move in that direction. But we don't really have the in-between as far as the fixed rail, streetcars, trolleys, connecting to regional rail systems nearby us. And we're such a small jurisdiction, I feel like we need that to really make it work. But my question is, when we're trying to partner with the state and county, but it seems like there isn't always a super amount of interest currently building out that regional electric system that we as a smaller jurisdiction seem to need. So do you have any suggestions, experience as far as how to build that kind of, how do you sell this to the other jurisdictions in the region to transition to this kind of a system, sustainable system?
You probably have more experience with that, connecting those dots.
I think, of course, if you want to move towards these kinds of solutions, you have to build out the utilities or the grid. It's not going to hold up. It's not going to work out. So if you see it today compared to where you see it going forward, we've really looked at some of the connecting. When you connect both the transportation system in terms of trams and stuff like that, and understanding how do you build an energy system that would function when you have electrified mobility or cars or trams and all the others. And if you don't do that today, you're going to have a lot of fixing at the end. So, but we have several partners that we work with, so to talk about that. So happy to talk about that later on.
You might also consider, you mentioned micromobility. I don't know if you've looked into microtransit. So other kind of on-demand, nimble, gap-filling type of almost sort of bridge technologies in a sense of if ultimately the goal is more regional connectivity and economies of scale, but you're not there yet and want to provide some sort of service to the community. There are a lot of operators that do that kind of more nimble service. And then hopefully eventually you convince your neighbors of the need of this connectivity so you could phase out the individual pockets once you have the actual regional connectivity. Okay.
Thank you so much. So our final panel will look at how cities and states can move from climate commitments to large-scale implementation, with a focus on partnering with the private sector. After a day of focusing on solutions in electric construction, efficient buildings, and clean transportation, this conversation will explore what it takes to deploy these models across the US, drawing on state leadership, international experience, financing, and public-private partnerships. The discussion will be moderated by Tricia Miller, Executive Managing Director for Capital Markets at Redbrick. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. And on behalf of all three of us, I'd like to say thank you to the House of Sweden and the Green Transition Initiative for including us in today's program. I am Tricia Miller. I'm with Redbrick LMD, which is a Washington-based real estate developer of large-scale institutional quality mixed-use development projects here in the city. And we have sustainability as the core of our value proposition. We firmly believe that delivering green buildings is not only good for the planet, but is accretive to investor returns. And we just delivered here in DC the largest multifamily building in the world to seek ILFI zero carbon certification. And we have 5 more just like it under design and development. And we're about to start construction on the first cross-laminated timber multifamily building here in the Mid-Atlantic. So excited to be a part of this. Before we get started, I'd love to ask, how many people in the room are not from Sweden? Excellent. And how many of you who are not from Sweden have been to Sweden? Excellent, I love that. So my daughter and I went last year for summer vacation because we are huge ABBA fans. And we really wanted to see the ABBA Museum. And what I discovered when I was there was that Sweden was far more than just ABBA. And in addition to all the great exports, though, around technology, services, products related to sustainability, I still do believe one of the greatest exports of Sweden is ABBA music. So for those of you who have not had the pleasure to go to Sweden, please, I was blown away. It is one of the prettiest countries I have ever been to. And the beauty of the people there is just amazing. So I'm going to put in this commercial for Sweden. Please go if you haven't been there. It is an amazing, amazing country. So with that, would the two of you introduce yourselves and your respective firms, please? Sure. Oh, and I should say, let me at least say their titles. Casey Kadam is the Executive Director of U.S. Climate Alliance. And Bella, I don't want to butcher your name, Tonkanogi.
Perfect.
All right.
Beautiful.
I practiced it when I was sitting back there, is the Senior Director of Programs at the Climate Policy Institute. And both of these individuals are true leaders in this field, and I'm honored to be here with you today. So please describe yourself and your firm and what you focus on.
Sure, happy to. Good afternoon, everybody. I would add to ABBA, maybe a more recent musical import is Max Martin, who produced the new Taylor Swift album.
Yes, that is true.
There you go.
That's another great export.
But in addition to that, that is not what I do usually, so only on the weekends. But I work for an organization called Climate Policy Initiative. We are a global analytic and advisory nonprofit organization. We focus on climate finance. Much of our work is actually focused on emerging markets and developing economies. So some of what I'll talk about today is sort of bringing in some lessons that we've been learning working with cities and countries around the world. We also manage something called the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, which is a network of city networks, research institutions, finance institutions, academics, NGOs that are focused on closing the infrastructure gap for cities around the world. So really excited to talk about some of that work today.
I love that we've started with like our Swiftie bona fides right at the front. I'm a fellow Swiftie, but also more importantly, I'm Executive Director of the U.S. Climate Alliance. My name is Casey. The Alliance is a bipartisan coalition of 24 U.S. governors who are all committed to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. We formed back in 2017 in response to the first Trump administration's announced withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. The governors of California, Washington, and New York came forward the very next day and said, we're still in, we're forming the U.S. Climate Alliance, and 3 governors today is 24 governors. We represent about 60% of the U.S. economy, 55% of the U.S. population, so really significant market share. And all across our coalition states and territories are continuing to move forward on their bold climate ambitions and goals, despite the federal headwinds and in spite of a lot of the challenges that we face this year and with the federal government. And so I'm here to basically bring a lot of optimism and hope into the room. If you guys are feeling demoralized and bummed out about the state of the world, I'm with you. But I have 24 bosses who are absolutely committed to continuing the fight against climate change and making sure that we're building a resilient and sustainable future. And so it's my pleasure to get a chance to work with all of them and sort of across sectors.
I love both of your optimism and positive attitude. I think it's great. That's what we need. So Casey, let's start with you.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you're working with 24 different states and territories, working hand in glove with the governors. Where are you seeing the biggest momentum right now on implementation of green solutions? And what's driving that action to go beyond just the plans and the pledges, but to actually move it forward, get it in place, and get the ball rolling?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I love that this is sort of like the state and city panel, because that's where implementation happens. I would say almost all of what we're doing is on an implementation-focused basis. I'm going to start by just taking a little bit of a moment to brag, which is to say I will talk about sort of how we're implementing, but we just released new results on our emissions across the Alliance a few weeks ago at Climate Week, and it is just a proof point that what we're doing is working. So we just announced that since 2005, our coalition has reduced our collective net greenhouse gas emissions by 24%. Which is really, really huge. It puts us on track for our 2025 targets. And so I think sort of across the board, you can see very clearly that what we're doing is working, and it's driving real results, and it is turning their ambitions into reality. And if you dig deeper into the numbers, you can see that that is primarily driven by the push towards cleaner electricity. We've reduced emissions in the electricity sector by 45% in the last couple of decades, which is a huge, huge reduction. And then in transportation, which is the next highest emitting sector in our coalition, we've reduced emissions 17%. And when you compare our 24% reductions in the Alliance to the rest of the country is about 19%. Non-alliance states and territories are about 16%. So if you ever sort of are asking yourself, does state level leadership matter in this moment, the numbers make it really clear it does. Thank you. Yeah. All credit to our states and territories. And the reality is that work began long before the Alliance was formed. So states have been at the sort of in the business of fighting climate change for decades. We now have about 8 years. What we found is that the Alliance is a huge catalyst for action, bringing states together around collaboration, bringing them around shared goals and shared ambitions, adopting substantially similar policies in a lot of different states has been a huge mover in terms of moving our ball forward. And since the Alliance was formed, our states have adopted about 2,300 bold actions and policies to the climate crisis. And that sort of cuts across every sector of the economy. And so asking me to sort of choose my favorites is like kind of choosing your favorite kids, but a few that I'm really excited about are in clean transportation. First and foremost, that is our number one biggest emitting sector. Passenger vehicles is by far and away the number one source of emissions in the Alliance. And so, in response to a lot of harmful actions that the federal government has taken this year, 13 of our states came together and have formed an Affordable Clean Cars Coalition to continue driving the path towards an EV future. And that is sort of taking a new approach of really sort of meeting the consumer where they are and saying we need to get EVs to be more affordable, more accessible, make it easier to charge, lower the price point, because we know that that's one of the key barriers to getting people to adopt clean cars.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also really excited about sort of transmission. We know that in order to sustain the transition to cleaner electricity, we need to modernize our transmission system. And so 22 of our states are collaborating on something called the Modern Grid Deployment Initiative, where they're working to reconduct our existing transmission lines, get more grid-enhancing technologies into the grid to expand the capacity to bring more clean electricity onto the grid. What else would I like to talk about? I would like to say that governors are using their voice. This is, I think, one of the big things right now when it comes to implementation, is that so many of the federal clean energy tax credits have new deadlines following the reconciliation bill that Congress passed. And so governors and mayors have actually joined together on a nationwide effort to help raise public awareness so that people know to act before December 31st if you want to install a new heat pump, if you want to install a new solar panel on your home, if you want to make your home more energy efficient, to weatherize your home. There are tax credits that are still available. And I think the numbers that came out at the end of quarter 3 just show how much hunger there is for clean energy and clean technologies. The EV sales exceeded 10% of the market share in quarter 3 for the very first time. So I think another sort of key part is just governors and mayors using the bully pulpit and using their voice to continue helping Americans understand what technologies are available to them.
Agreed. I'm on my 5th Tesla, by the way. I love it. So
I just bought my first.
go electric. For those
I just
that
bought my
haven't.
first
But
Hyundai
this is an
Ioniq
audience
5.
preaching to the
So
choir.
yeah, it's great.
It is. Electric cars are great. And I know, Bella, you and I talked about that at the break.
That's right.
But you focus a lot on the international, on global initiatives. And you're working with cities, financial institutions, governments around the world. What can cities and states here in the U.S. learn from other countries? Because I would argue we're not the most advanced in leading this green initiative. Certainly Sweden and others are much more so. But what can we learn from other countries about making progress towards net zero without relying on government federal support?
Sure, yeah, and I mean, I think everywhere, no government anywhere in the world has completely figured everything out. So not to say that the what I might talk about is because there's less going on here, but I think there's some really good best practices around the world. Just to talk about a few of them, I mean, one is just knowing what is going on in your jurisdiction in terms of investments. So, and how to use your existing budgets for climate investment. And so it's just a counting exercise. So we do a lot of that at CPI. We track climate finance all around the world. We've also worked with a number of national governments as well as state governments in the US and subnational governments in other countries just to help them understand how much climate investment is flowing in their jurisdiction. So that can include both from their public budgets, but also just as importantly and perhaps more importantly, the private investment that's flowing. And that helps them to have a picture and understand the kinds of the tools and levers that they might be able to pull to further increase that investment. So we worked with South Africa a couple years ago to help them understand the climate investment in their country. And that was the first time they realized that 80% of the climate investment in their country was domestic, and most of it was coming from private financial institutions. They had assumed most of it was coming from international organizations, from the World Bank, from foreign direct investment. No, it was mostly coming from domestic sources, and that helped them gain an appreciation for what they could do and the levers they could pull. I think more pragmatically, there are also, or more kind of tangibly, there are a couple of examples that we have seen in other countries that have been quite interesting. One is one of the members of our Climate Finance Alliance is RAMCC. They are an Argentinian network of cities. And what they did was they got together and decided to develop an energy efficiency trust fund. So working together, multiple cities were able to leverage the pooled resources to be able to hire talent, to be able to make investments and to aggregate some of their procurement so they could lower the costs of installing and bringing in energy efficiency, for example, to their municipal buildings. So really see that kind of aggregated procurement, the cities working together is a really important example in other countries. We're actually working with the GTI as well in the Viable Cities Initiative on looking at different ways around the world we can do aggregated procurement and where there's more opportunities for that. The last thing I will mention is around project preparation. I think this has been a big example and a really important example in other countries. You'll hear a lot of times investors saying, oh, well, I would invest, but there aren't any bankable projects for me to invest in. And you will hear cities saying, I have so many projects, I can't find any investors. Well, are they both right? Are they both wrong? Like, what's going on? And so we have worked with a number of intermediary institutions and financial institutions, grant makers, et cetera, to try to make the process of, to reduce the transaction costs actually of helping a project get from the earliest pre-feasibility stages through feasibility studies, through structuring, all the way to financial close, and to help cities and also the financiers actually find each other through that process and make it smoother. So we have a connector program that does that. So a few examples, hopefully some of them may be of interest in this room as well.
Absolutely. And so you've kind of touched on this next question that I have for both of you. And Casey, maybe you want to go first. How can local governments enable more private investment in climate priorities? And so are there examples, and you cited a couple of cities or states, that you think are using financing, procurement, partnerships effectively to get at solutions? And what does it take to scale those approaches?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what I would say is the federal government is not providing the kind of stability and certainty that I think the market needs. And what I'd say to any investors is my 24 states and territories can offer a significantly greater level of regulatory certainty and stability. The federal government over the last, now 12 years is just sort of like wildly flip-flopping from extreme to extreme. My states and territories have been committed to their climate goals and have been moving towards a net zero future that entire time, right? And they are not fluctuating wildly. And so I think that for folks who are looking for a greater level of stability and certainty, state and local governments offer, I think, investors in the private sector exactly that. And so, I think state and local governments can play a catalytic role in helping to shepherd through and mobilize capital, even sometimes without large budgets. And I'll be sort of honest that state governments are facing a pretty significant budget shortfall as a result of the reconciliation bill, cuts to Medicaid, cuts to nutrition assistance. And so that's obviously going to have an impact on their ability to make concrete, immediate investments where they don't have revenue coming in. But even without that, they can offer credit enhancements and low guarantees. They can offer bonds. They can help de-risk private investments. I think they can help identify some of those investable opportunities. And they can also help align incentives that exist at the state and local level so that it's easy to sort of claim multiple incentives at the same time. A growing number of our states are sort of launching sort of one-stop shops where if you're a business owner or you're a resident and you're looking and you're trying to figure out sort of like, I want to do X project, it's sometimes really hard, right? Like to figure out what you can pair between a local incentive, a utility state-based incentive, a state-based incentive, and a federal incentive. And so a growing number of our states are now launching sort of like funding navigator tools where you can go in and say, this is the project I want to do, and it can sort of churn out, you're eligible for this rebate, for this incentive, for this tax credit, and to help bring all of that together. I think our states also have sort of innovated on sort of the financing sort of stream, and so states have had green banks long before the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund existed. A lot of those green banks have a demonstrated record. I mean, the Connecticut Green Bank is one of the sort of, I think, the best examples of this, where they have the ability to leverage $8 for every single public dollar that's invested. New York launched its congestion pricing program, which is being used as a bonding mechanism to increase financing for the MTA to do really critically needed investments to the public transit system. And so I sort of think, you can identify a lot of these sort of funding tools and mechanisms and policies that states have put into place as sort of a demonstration of how they're able to help bridge that gap. But I just want to circle back to, I think one of the most important things that they can offer, which is just, I think, sort of clarity for the market about where the market is headed. And so one of the things that I'm most excited about that our governors have done is a couple years ago they launched a collective commitment to quadruple heat pump installations across Alliance states and territories by the end of the decade. We looked at it, we said we've got 5 million heat pumps currently installed, we know where the market is headed, we know that the rebates are going to exist, we know the programs and investments are going to be there. We're going to go ahead and tell heat pump manufacturers in the HVAC industry, in these 24 states and territories, you're going to be able to sell 15 million heat pumps. And I'm really excited to say that we are well ahead of pace for meeting that goal. I hope that we'll have an opportunity actually to increase our commitments before we get to the end of the decade, because heat pumps are just better technologies. But we know from private sector that they are using that commitment as a way to sort of inform their market decisions and their business investments. And so I think one of the best things we can do is be very clear, we're not walking back our plans, we're not walking back our goals. This is the direction we're headed. Please invest accordingly.
Well, you said a lot, but I will say that navigator tool that you talked about would be extremely helpful to companies like the one I work for, extremely helpful. But there's a lot there that you mentioned, and I love all of those ideas. Bella, we only have a couple minutes left. Do you want to add to that? And also, would you talk a little bit, I know you're doing a lot of tracking of capital and how it's flowing. Would you add that into your comments as well?
Sure, yeah. We talked a little bit before the session about, and it was great to hear you do that too, of just injecting some optimism, and I can certainly do that. I mean, one, I think just to add to what Casey said is, cities and states, it's about the funding available, but it's more about the policy environment. It's the stability and also the specific policy. So I think two of the unsung policies this year, perhaps they've been sung, but just to underline them, one is the California housing policy that the previous panelists mentioned, which is going to essentially allow for a massive amount of housing to be built next to transit. It's a climate policy as much as it's a housing policy. And second is the streamlining of residential solar permitting in Florida. US residential solar is some of the most expensive in the world. It's $3 a watt, 2 to 3. In Australia, it's $1. And a lot of that is due to the soft costs, including permitting. And so I think that you are seeing some momentum in the US for policies that are going to be very, very important for states to reduce emissions. And so that I just wanted to underline the policy piece. In terms of the optimism and getting back to investment overall, so we track climate finance around the world. We've been doing that since 2011 or 2012. We found back when we started, we were at about $300 billion of investment in climate solutions globally. Last year, or this year, we published data for the previous year, and we are now at $1.9 trillion of climate investment globally. That is a huge increase, and it represents a doubling since 2020. And so we are on this exponential growth curve.
That's great.
And it's incredible. $1 trillion of that was private investment. Wow. Last year, 90% of electricity capacity globally was renewable. This year, on track for about 25% of global auto sales to be electric. We're in a moment where we can actually get to where we need to be in terms of investment needs in the next 4 to 5 years if we keep going at the exponential rate we're going at now. So all to say, there is a real momentum and real investment going into sectors across the climate solution sphere. And so I think there is room for optimism. Obviously, we all need to continue to work as hard as we're working and harder to make sure that that materializes. But I think it's a really good story to tell.
What a great message to end on. Thank you. And Bella and Casey both have their thumb on the pulse of what's going on. So I encourage you, if you have questions, talk to them at the reception. And then I'll just say, do plan your next vacation for Sweden. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Definitely some reasons to be optimistic. And now we're ready for our final remarks of the day. Justin Worland is a senior award-winning journalist at Time magazine and a leading voice on climate change and the green transition. And he has been named Climate Journalist of the Year. Please join me in welcoming Justin.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. How many of you had the opportunity to check out the electric ferry? I'm curious during the break. So yeah, not that many. I am told that you can still go in the networking reception after. I would say if I had one piece of constructive feedback, it's that it was really hard to get cardamom buns and see the ferry. And so I would just, I wish that I could have done both. So my task here in these final minutes is rather daunting, both because the networking reception is happening in just a minute, and also because I'm meant to recap this really incredible day and try to boil it down into a few insights. So like I said, it's daunting. When I was first asked to come and speak here, Joanna and Malin asked me to say something inspiring and uplifting, and I think they caught me on a tough day because I said, I'm a journalist, and when you look at the world out there, you look at the climate story, it's pretty tough, and I have to stick to those facts. And of course, it is really tough. This is going to be one of the hottest years on record, as every year seems to be, and we obviously have a challenging political climate here in Washington and some other places around the world. And that's all true, but it's of course not the whole truth. And an honest assessment of where we are requires acknowledging an adage that I often rely on when I'm doing my own reporting, trying to stay true to the facts, which is that two things can be true at once. Right now, we have these really bleak realities, and we also have this remarkable progress that's happening, and we heard a lot about that today. And so I'm going to just try to sprinkle in quite a few insights because there was a lot said today, just to underscore some of the positive things that are happening, and just kind of running honestly just through the sessions today. I love Jigar opening with that great example of switching light bulbs and the role that played in flatlining U.S. emissions, right? This one policy change. And then this bigger sort of shift in the conversation, reframing climate not just from around emissions reductions, but also the opportunities for economy and competitiveness, the security implications, and of course he framed that as a prompt, as a way to encourage people to do that. But it's already happening, and I think that's a very positive development. I loved the presentation from Mike on how his global company learned from Sweden and brought that understanding to the U.S. The example of that one building, $1 million a year in saved costs from energy reduction, energy consumption reduction, is incredible. And those are the kinds of stories we need out there. I also loved, and this was a sort of a theme throughout the day, finding ways to circulate these stories to get people connected. And so the work that he mentioned with the venture arm, connecting the dots between small companies and large companies, I found to be pretty important. Then we heard from Kate and all the panelists on clean construction. The recognition of that enormous possibility of tackling embodied carbon is, I think, overdue, but also great to see how that's come to the fore. And to hear some of the case studies, again, case studies providing examples that we can all draw on and find ways to circulate and inspire others. Hard to beat the Empire State Building story, right? Making the business case using the Empire State Building. I think we actually did a story on that business case, which is, I'm proud to say. But connecting the technical and economic possibilities using this iconic building. And then, this is not so much the positive, but getting into some of the challenges and spreading that message, I thought was so important. We need to think about the various barriers that are preventing people from latching on. And I think that discussion from Dana really, really did that. It's hard to beat what has to be the most iconic line of today, which is the Ozempic for buildings. So who can resist Ozempic for buildings? I just getting towards the end, and I admittedly took fewer notes as the day wore on, mostly because I was trying to figure out how to piece together 15 minutes of comments from all that in that time. But I did, the SB 79, the piece in California about development around transit hubs, that's so important and exciting work. Let's see. My notes also got worse throughout the day. Okay, and then that last session, we all just listened to it, but the role of states, the role, the examples from emerging market countries, and the exponential rate of change across all of these different components of the energy transition, just a really important story to underscore, because given the zeitgeist of things today, I'm often asked questions like, "Oh, are you still writing about that? Like, is that still happening?" And it's like, yes, it's still happening, and it's surprising how many people don't comprehend that. So that was my quick overview. I'll just try to share a little bit about my own perspective and thoughts on that, connecting back. I love things like this. I spend a lot of my time listening, trying to learn about what's happening in the energy and climate world. I love getting out into the world and having those conversations, and then like sneaking time to write about it in my notes app sometimes. But I have been spending a lot of time in LA recently, and I think it's a really interesting example. It's jarring because, in my visits to LA, I'll spend some time out talking to people who were impacted by the wildfires, learning about what went wrong, trying to understand the points of failure, things that didn't have to happen the way they did, but did. And then, the next day I'll line up a visit with a clean tech company that's working on solutions that could have prevented some of the very problems that people in LA experienced. It's the same city, it's different worlds, and really, I guess my sort of key point in talking here is we need to find ways to connect those dots. And so much of the conversation today focused on finding those connection points. That's the work that I'm trying to do. A conversation or a point that a clean tech investor made to me in LA recently was the hard to abate sectors have become a question of whether we're willing to abate sectors. She said it a little bit cleaner than I did, but that's the way that the conversation needs to change. We need to have a conversation not just about is it technically possible, but how are we going to do it, and how are we going to make people understand the possibilities. This is kind of where the day started. We heard from Ani and Jigar at the top. Ani talked about the need for coordination. I think his book is really good at pointing out the need to orchestrate all of this because it doesn't just happen. And Jigar talked about the need for a reframe. And I agree with all of that completely. I would just say, one more thing, and it's kind of simple. We need to talk about it, right? We need to leave this room, spread the word about what's happening in the space so that people understand. During Climate Week, heard from had this meeting with this private equity investor who was really keen on clean tech companies and helping them scale. And he told me that there's no challenge finding good investments, but the challenge was finding or convincing LPs that this is all really happening. Like, how does he convey to people who don't really follow this stuff closely that this is real? I heard a similar story from somebody who had spent quite a bit of money from their balance sheet on converting their concrete manufacturing operations, and then convincing down to their own buyers that this is actually usable stuff, that they could actually do this and it would be good and it wouldn't cause problems, and was kind of like, what do we do about that? And in LA, we talked about SB 79 and its importance, but you hear from people on the ground building back, and we don't need to get too much into the specifics of SB 79, but concern about all sorts of things that are ultimately good for addressing some of these problems, but a fear that is born out of either misinformation or a lack of information. So we need to talk about it. We need to build understanding. Some folks, when I have made similar arguments, have looked at me quizzically. One policy wonk said something like, well, if we get the right policies, the smart money's going to figure it out. It's all going to happen. And I go back to my point about two things can be true at once. It's true. People are making this happen. There are people making a profit off of some of these technologies, some of these investments. But to scale, we need broader understanding, and we need to tell the story. And so that's really it. I think this was a great day with lots of discussions, lots of stories. My day-to-day job is trying to find ways to tell those stories and get people interested. But I would encourage all of you as well to find ways to spread the word outside this room, keep telling the story. Thank you so much to the Embassy of Sweden, and have a nice reception.
Thank you so much, Justin, for your reflections, and you really did a great summary of the day. So as we heard, the solutions are here and they can be deployed at scale. We've already seen how much potential there is when Swedish and American partners work together, and there really is momentum to build on. A warm thank you to our co-hosts, the World Resources Institute, and to our Swedish partner organizations, and to all of today's speakers, and for all of you to be part of the conversation today. And now we invite you to continue the discussions upstairs at the networking reception. Thank you so much and have a lovely evening.